Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. I've been staying at my family's remote cabin. For the last 3 nights, something has been knocking on my window. Alright, I don't know where to start. I'm in a motel room that smells like stale cigarettes and bleach, about 100 miles from where I was last night. For context, I work a job that essentially melts your brain. You know the kind. Endless spreadsheets, back-to-back video calls where everyone talks over each other, a constant barrage of emails that are all marked urgent. After a particularly brutal 6-month project, I was completely fried. A walking zombie. My boss, to his credit, saw it and basically ordered me to take 2 weeks off. Go somewhere with no cell service, he said. The first place that came to mind was my father's old cabin. It's not really just my father's. It was his father's before him, and his father's before that. It's been in the family for a century, maybe more. A small, sturdy log cabin deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. It's the literal definition of off the grid. A well for water, a generator for a few hours of electricity at night, and a fireplace for heat. It was a perfect place to disconnect, to just sit in silence and let my brain unscramble itself. My dad passed away a few years ago. We weren't estranged, but we weren't close. He was a quiet, solitary man, and the cabin was a sanctuary. I have a few hazy, happy memories of being there as a little kid. The smell of pine needles and wood smoke, the feel of rough-hewn timber under my bare feet, him teaching me how to skip stones on the nearby creek. Going back felt like a way to honor him, I guess. A way to find some of that peace he always seemed to have when he was there. The drive up was long, the last hour on a winding dirt road that was more pothole than path. When I finally pulled up, the place looked exactly as I remembered. The logs were a darker, more weathered gray. The porch sagged a little on one side, but it was solid. The air was clean and cold, and the silence was so total it felt like a weight in my ears. No cars, no sirens, no people. Just the wind sighing through the massive pines that surrounded the property like ancient sentinels. I spent the first day just existing. I unpacked my meager supplies, books, non-perishable food, a couple of good bottles of whiskey. I swept the dust off the floors, started a fire in the hearth, and sat on the porch watching the sun go down, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples. For the first time in months, the knot in my chest started to loosen. That first night, I fired up the generator for a few hours to run the lights and read. The cabin has 2 main windows in the living area, big single panes of glass that look out into the impenetrable blackness of the forest. As soon as I flipped on the lamp beside my armchair, they came. The moths. It's normal, of course. A single point of light in an ocean of darkness. You're going to attract every insect for miles. They fluttered and danced against the glass, dozens of them. Their dusty wings like soft gray snow against the pane. I barely noticed them. It was a familiar, almost comforting sound of the wilderness. The soft, papery thump of their bodies hitting the window. I read for an hour, turned off the generator, and fell into the deepest, most dreamless sleep I'd had in years. The second day was even better. I chopped some wood for the fire, went for a long hike, and felt the city stress sloughing off me with every step. I was reconnecting with something primal, something real. The world felt simple again. That night, I did the same thing. Fired up the generator, poured myself a small whiskey, and settled in with my book. And again, the moths came. At first, it was the same as the night before. A chaotic flurry of wings against the glass. But as the minutes stretched on, I started to notice something. A sound beneath the general chaos. A single persistent tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was distinct from the soft, fleshy thuds of the other moths. It was sharper, more deliberate. I looked up from my book, trying to pinpoint it. On the right-hand window, a large, pale moth, bigger than the others, almost the size of my thumb, was clinging to the glass. It wasn't fluttering. It was perfectly still, except for its wings. It would lift one wing and strike it against the pane. Tap, tap, tap. It was odd, but I shrugged it off. Insects are weird. I went back to my book, but I couldn't focus. The sound was impossible to ignore now that I'd isolated it. There was a rhythm to it. Tap, 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 tap. A pause. Then again. Tap, 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 tap. I closed my book and just watched. The big moth stayed in the same spot, its wings methodically striking the glass. It was bizarre. I'd never seen a moth do anything like it. It felt less like an insect attracted to light, and more like something knocking, trying to get my attention. I know it sounds crazy. I thought it was crazy then. I chalked it up to being alone, my mind playing tricks on me in the overwhelming silence. I shut off the generator early, and the tapping stopped the instant the light went out. The silence that rushed in to fill the void felt heavier than before. The next day, the thought of the tapping moth followed me around. It was a splinter in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something deeply unnatural. The perfect solitude of the cabin now felt watchful. The woods seemed to be holding their breath. That evening, I was almost hesitant to turn on the generator, but the thought of sitting in complete darkness was worse. So I pulled the cord, the engine sputtered to life, and the lights flickered on. I didn't even pretend to read. I just sat in the armchair, whiskey in hand, and waited. Within minutes, the cloud of moths was back, and sure enough, there it was, the same large, pale moth, in almost the exact same spot on the window. It was still for a moment, and then the tapping began. Tap, 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 tap. A long pause. Tap, 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 tap. This time I was ready. I grabbed a pen and an old leather-bound journal I found in the desk drawer, my grandfather's, by the look of the faded initials on the cover. I didn't know what I was doing, exactly. It just felt like something I had to do. A challenge. I decided to log the taps. I made a simple system. A dot for a short, quick tap, and a dash for a slightly longer, more resonant one. I noted the pauses between sequences. For the next 3 hours, I sat there like some mad scientist, my eyes glued to the moth, my pen scratching across the yellowed paper of the journal. The world shrank to that single pane of glass, and the rhythmic sound echoing in the small, warm room. Dash. 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 Straight face. Page after page filled with my frantic scribbles of dots and dashes. The moth was tireless. It never seemed to stop, save for the deliberate pauses between its tapping. My hands started to cramp. My eyes burned from the strain, but I couldn't stop. I was compelled. There was a logic to it, a structure that was too consistent to be random. And then a memory surfaced, something I'd read years ago online, one of those late-night internet rabbit holes. It was a pop science article about animal intelligence. The article mentioned experiments where scientists had managed to teach bumblebees to associate symbols with rewards, a rudimentary form of communication. It even briefly mentioned the possibility of teaching them simple, binary signals, like a very basic form of Morse code. The pen fell from my hand and clattered onto the wooden floor. Morse code? It couldn't be. It was the most insane, ridiculous idea I had ever had. Moths can't tap out Morse code. It's impossible. It's a violation of every law of nature I understood. But the patterns on the page, they looked so familiar. I remembered learning some of it as a kid in Scouts. 3 dots were S, 3 dashes were O. Tap, 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 tap. I looked at the window. The moth was tapping out S. OS. My blood went cold. I grabbed my phone. It had no service, but the battery was full. I had downloaded a bunch of stuff before I left, just in case of emergencies. Books, movies, and a survival guide app. I fumbled it open, my fingers slick with sweat. The app had a utilities section, flashlight, compass, and a Morse code chart. My heart was hammering against my ribs, so hard I could feel it in my throat. I pulled the journal into my lap, turned to the first page of my transcription, and began to translate. My hands were shaking so badly it was hard to trace the lines. The first few sequences were jumbled, gibberish. I probably misheard them, wrote them down wrong. I felt a wave of relief. It was nothing, just my overactive imagination. I was about to laugh at myself, to pour a stiff whiskey and call it a night. But then I got to a sequence I was sure I recorded perfectly. It was long, and the rhythm had been incredibly clear. Dash, dash. I went letter by letter. U-N-D-E-R. Under. My breath hitched. Okay, coincidence. It had to be. I kept going, my eyes scanning the pages of dots and dashes, comparing them to the chart on my phone screen. The next clear word I translated was dash, dash, H-U-N-G-R-Y. Hungry. The air in the cabin suddenly felt thin, cold. I stood up and paced the small room, the old floorboards groaning under my feet. Under. Hungry. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a message. But who was sending it? And how? The moth was just an insect. It couldn't think. It couldn't reason. I spent the rest of the night translating. The generator sputtered and died around 2 a.m., plunging the room into darkness and silence. The tapping stopped instantly. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, the words I'd translated burning in my mind. Soon, deep, weight, stone, roots. They were disjointed, single words, fragments of a thought. It was like listening to someone talk in their sleep, but they painted a terrifying, impressionistic picture. Something was under, but under what? Under the cabin? Something deep. Something made of stone and tangled in roots. And it was hungry, waiting. I felt that I may be overreacting, and my mind just completing a puzzle that doesn't exist. The next day, I was a wreck. I didn't hike. I didn't chop wood. I barely ate. I searched the cabin, looking for, I don't know what, a clue, an explanation. I tore through the drawers of my father's old desk, the bookshelf filled with dusty paperbacks. And then I found it, tucked in the back of the grandfather's journal I'd been using. A section at the very end, where the handwriting changed from my grandfather's neat cursive to my great-grandfather's spidery scrawl. The entries were short, cryptic. October 12th, 1934. The generator is a blessing, but the light calls to it. Must be sparing. May 3rd, 1938. Dug a new well. Hit stone at 20 feet. Smooth, black stone. Not slate. Filled it back in. Will draw from the creek. September 21st, 1945. It sleeps, but it listens. The old man knew. The silence is its cradle. The noise its dream. Do not wake the dream. July 16th, 1952. Tell the boy to keep the lamps low. Never dig past the old oak. Some things are best left buried. Some hunger never dies. My blood turned to ice. Some hunger never dies. My ancestors, did they knew? That night, I knew I had to listen. I was terrified. Every primal instinct in my body screamed at me to get in my car and drive. But another part of me, a morbid, obsessive curiosity, had to know the rest of the story. I had to know what I was sitting on top of. I fired up the generator. The moths came. The tapping started. This time, the messages were different. They were longer, more coherent. It was as if by listening, I had somehow strengthened connection. The moth tapped, and I wrote, my hand flying across the page. It felt like I was taking dictation from beyond the grave. I didn't wait to translate. I filled page after page of the journal, the dots and dashes becoming a blur. The moth was tapping faster now, more urgently. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with a strange, static energy. The light from the lamp seemed to dim, as if the very air was absorbing it. Finally, after hours, the moth stopped. It fell from the window pane, a tiny, lifeless husk on the porch outside. The other moths swirled, confused, before dispersing into the night. Silence. I sat there for a long moment, my chest tight with suffocating dread. Then, with trembling hands, I picked up my phone and began to translate the last long message. The story it told was not of this world. It spoke of a time before the trees, before the soil. It spoke of a vast, silent intelligence that fell from the stars and burrowed deep into the cooling earth to escape the harsh light of the sun. It described itself not as a creature of flesh and blood, but of patience and gravity and hunger. It spoke of the first people, my ancestors, who found it. They didn't understand it, but they feared it. They felt its presence in the deep rock, a coldness that seeped up from the ground. They couldn't kill it, so they bound it. They performed rituals, laid down great stones, and buried it under layers of earth and prayer, entombing it in a silent, dreamless sleep. The messages explained that it could not see or hear. Its only sense was a form of perception tied to energy. For millennia, its only sensations were the slow warmth of the sun deep in the earth, the crawling of roots, the shifting of rock. It slept, but the coming of man brought new sensations. Fire, the vibrations of voices, and then electricity, artificial light, to its ancient dormant consciousness. This light was a piercing scream in an eternity of silence, a sharp, painful needle pricking away. It couldn't move. Not yet. The bindings of the first men were strong, but it could reach out. It could touch the tiny, simple nervous systems of the creatures drawn to the light. The insects. It could borrow their bodies, use their frantic energy to beat against the barrier of my window, to tap out its story, its plea, its warning, in the only language it had formed from the binary chaos of their fluttering. I felt sick. My family built a watchtower, a prison guard shack, and for generations they had kept the watch, living quietly, sparingly, so as not to disturb the prisoner in the dungeon below. My father, with his quiet solitude, was a warden, and I, with my city stress and my desperate need for light and noise, had been shaking the bars of the cell door all week. My eyes scanned the last few lines of my transcription. A new, frantic tapping had begun just before the mock died. It was short, precise. I translated the last sequence of dots and dashes, my pencil scratching across the page. / straight face, / dash, / dash, / My heart stopped. I read it again to be sure. I-T/W A-K-E-S/W H-E-N/T H-E/L I-G-H-T/G O-E-S/O-U-T. As my mind processed a final, horrifying word, a sound came from the porch, a low, electrical buzz. I looked up from the journal. The bare bulb above the porch door, the very light that had drawn the moths, was flickering. It buzzed, a dying insect sound, flared with a brilliant, painful intensity, and then went dark. The lamp beside me flickered in sympathy, and then it too died as the generator outside coughed, sputtered, and fell silent, plunging me into absolute, total darkness. The rhythmic tapping was gone. The world was utterly silent. Not the peaceful silence of forest I had craved, but a dead, waiting, profound silence. The kind of silence that listens. I didn't breathe. I couldn't move. My entire being was focused on listening. And then I heard it. It wasn't a sound from outside. It wasn't the wind or a branch falling or an animal. It came from directly beneath my feet, from under the floorboards, from deep in the earth the cabin was built upon. It was a slow, heavy, scraping sound. The sound of something impossibly ancient and vast shifting its weight. The grating of stone against stone. The sound that vibrated up through the soles of my shoes and into my bones. It was the sound of a tomb door grinding open after 1,000 years. I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my throat, a choked, pathetic little gasp. That was it. The spell of morbid curiosity was broken, shattered by a blast of pure animal terror. I didn't think. I just reacted. I scrambled backwards, knocking over the armchair, my hands flailing in the dark. I crab-walked away from the sound, my only thought being out. I found the door by touch, fumbled with the bolt, my fingers feeling useless. The scraping sound was louder now, a deep, resonant groan that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. The door flew open, and I fell out onto the porch, gulping the cold night air. I didn't look back. I sprinted across the clearing to my car, my keys already in my hand, jabbing them at the lock. The scraping was a constant, grinding vibration in the ground now. I threw myself into the driver's seat, jammed the key in the ignition, and prayed. The engine turned over on the first try. I have never been so grateful for the roar of an internal combustion engine in my entire life. I slammed the car into reverse, not caring about the trees, and spun the wheel, my tires spitting gravel. The headlights cut a frantic sway through the darkness, illuminating the front of the cabin for a split second. There was nothing there, just the dark windows and the silent porch. But the ground in front of the steps, it looked wrong. It looked raised, like someone was pushing up from below. I didn't wait to see what it was. I stomped on the accelerator and fled down that winding dirt road, the car bucking and sliding, branches whipping against the windows. I didn't slow down until the dirt turned asphalt, and I didn't stop driving until the sun started to rise, and I saw the blessed, ugly, beautiful glow of a motel sign. So here I am, writing this. I left everything back there. My clothes, my father's memories, my grandfather's journal with its terrible notes. I can never go back. I know that the cabin, my family's legacy, is gone. It's a tomb, and I open the door. All I know is that something is awake that should have slept forever. Story 2. If a stranger offers to pay your dinner bill, be careful when you leave your table. I'm a server at a Midwestern diner. A few weeks ago, a customer appeared at one of the booths. I say appeared because I hadn't seen her come in, and usually I am very attentive to the sound of the doorbell. It was a pretty bustling evening, though. I approached to take her order. She sat with her back to me, her curly hair pinned up in a style that reminded me of old movies. Her age was hard to determine from behind, but she looked to be in her 60s, I guess. She was sitting perfectly still, statuesque. When I came around the front of the booth, I gasped and dropped my pen. The woman was not breathing, lips slightly parted, skin withered and shrunken, no movement, not the faintest motion of her chest. But it was the eyes that would give away she was dead, unblinking and unseeing, and a little too deeply shrunken in their sockets. Oh God, I took a step back, and then the woman's head turned, and she said in a raspy voice, "Just a coffee, please." Her eyes blinked. Not dead after all. Oh, of course. Sure. Any milk or sugar? Black. I scurried to get her coffee. When I looked back, she was again motionless. When it came time for the check, she put down a $50 bill. I started to tell her I didn't have change since all she'd ordered was a coffee, but she said, "It's all right, dear. It will cover the meal for that nice family over there." Her head inclined, ever so slightly, to a family in the corner booth having dinner. The family in the corner were regulars. Came here every Sunday with kids. The parents were divorced. The kids lived with their dad, and their mom always picked them up on weekends. This diner was on the route between the parent houses, and they'd meet up here to discuss the plans for the next week. They always left a tip, and the kids drew pictures for me. "Really?" I said to the old woman. "That's very nice of you." Without another word, the old woman stood up and left. The family were very pleasantly surprised when I approached and informed them that their meal had been paid for. They asked by who, and I told them the old woman from the other booth. One of the kids looked over where I'd indicated and said, "I didn't see any woman sitting there." Weird. The next time the old woman appeared was several weeks later. It was after midnight. Again, I heard no bell ring above the door. I was wiping down the counters, and when I looked up there, she was sitting at the same booth, like a statue, silent. I came over to take her order. I wondered if I should ask her about the family. I hadn't seen them in the weeks since she'd paid for their meal. It was strange. They'd been coming every Sunday, and then after she paid their meal, they stopped. As I neared the booth, suddenly the woman inhaled. It struck me that until then she'd been so still, I hadn't been sure if she'd been breathing at all. She turned to me and said, "Coffee, please." "Black." "Sure," since she wasn't exactly chatty. I just went and got her coffee, try and work up the nerve to strike up a casual conversation and ask her about the family. Before I could, the doorbell rang and Carlos came in. Carlos was a friend of my boss who liked to drop in once in a while. He ordered a burger, and we began chatting about how things were with his girlfriend and with his girlfriend's boyfriend. I can never keep track of who's in his astonishingly wide relationship circle. Apparently, he'd just adopted a dog. He showed me pictures while he ate. Carlos, not to be mean, but that might be the world's fuggliest dog, I told him. He laughed. Nobody wanted her. That's why I took her. That's sweet of you, but that thing looks like it has rabies. Scabies? What? I'm kidding. She's out mange, though. He started to tell me about how he'd rescued her when I heard a throat clear and remembered the woman at the booth. Shoot, I'd forgotten her order. I hurried to get her coffee, and as I set it down, asked if she wanted anything else, and she put a 20 down and said it was for that nice young man's burger. She didn't even drink the coffee I gave her. She got up and left, ignoring me when I started to ask, "Are you sure? Why do you keep paying for her?" "Hey," called Carlos. "Who are you talking to?" "The woman." I turned back, but she was already gone. "What woman?" "It's just you and me. You okay? Are you high or something?" I looked at the money in my hand. It was real enough. Burgers on the house. I told him. "For real? Thanks." He scarfed the last bite, hopped up, and told me he was late. No idea what sort of date he was off to at 1 a.m., but that's Carlos. And then he was breezing out the door. The next day, I heard he'd been shot. My boss told me. We were chatting about the boss's dog, and I mentioned Carlos's mangy rescue dog, and he suddenly got serious and informed me that last night, Carlos had been jumped on his way to a bar. He'd tried to fight off the muggers, but one of them had a gun. They shot him in the head. He said, grimly, "Jesus." I said, "My boss told me Carlos had been rushed to the hospital, but he was hanging by a thread, almost certain to die. Or if he survived, he'd be a vegetable." I was shaken, deeply, deeply shaken. Poor Carlos, his poor girlfriend, his poor, mangy dog. And a thought intruded. Was it because of the old woman? What about the family that used to come in Sundays but had disappeared? Had misfortune struck them, too? I resolved that the next time I saw the old woman, I would ask her what she was doing. I wouldn't let her pay for the next customer. The old woman returned just this afternoon. There were only a handful of customers, as it was between the lunch and dinner hour. As always, I didn't hear her come in. One moment I was busy bussing dishes. The next I spotted her at the booth. I straightened up and approached her. Her sunken eyes turned to me. I could never get over the feeling I was looking at death itself. Then she gave that sudden inhalation, like she was remembering to breathe, and she said, "Coffee, black," and I was surprised at the "and." "A root beer float," she added. I just pressed my lips together, nodded, and went to get the drinks. Surveyed the room. There were 3 other tables with customers. An old couple, a family with a teenage daughter, a woman working on her laptop. And even though I should have gotten the old woman her drinks right away, I instead made sure to get everyone else's orders to their tables and to get their bills to them. The couple paid, as did the woman on her laptop. That left only the family. They were still eating. I fetched the coffee and the float for the old woman, but mentally resolved not to let her pay for anybody. She did not react to my placing the drinks beside her. I was tense, counting the minutes until the family was near to finishing. The old woman cleared her throat. Ignoring her, I hurried over to the family and asked if they wanted dessert. They didn't. So I asked how they'd like to pay and quickly rang them up. Only then did I return to the old woman's booth. She had not touched either drink. She put a $10 bill on the table and said, "The root beer float is for you." "Oh," I said, and goosebumps rose along my arms, because how did she know that root beer floats are my favorite? "No, I can't have customers buy me drinks. It's against policy." "I insist," she said. "I'll bring you change for the coffee." She got up. "Actually, wait, here, I'll pay for everything." I quickly reached into my pocket for my wallet and dropped $10 onto the table. I'll get your coffee, too. On the house, since I took so long with your order. She frowned. Accept the gift that is given to you. Nope, I can pay for the root beer float, even though I didn't drink it, and your coffee is free. And I took her $10 and, holding my breath, seized her papery hand and shoved the bill into her fingers. She exhaled and left. I didn't turn around as she walked past me. Didn't hear the doorbell ring. But a moment later, when I looked over my shoulder, there was no trace of the old woman. A feeling of relief swept over me. A little while later, the dinner hour had arrived and the tables were full. I heard the doorbell ring, and it was them, my family of regulars. Today is not a Sunday, and I hadn't seen them in so long, so I was very surprised. I cleaned up their usual booth and got them seated. And when I came over to take their order, I exclaimed about how I'd miss seeing them. Oh, yeah, it was pretty crazy, said the dad. After we left, last time, we drove together. And I don't know if you remember how hard it was raining, but the car skidded and we lost control. You lost control, corrected Mom. Yes, I lost control because it was the minivan that I told you not to get, because those things flip way too easily. And it did. It rolled. I mean, it spun out right in the middle of the highway and then flipped over the guardrail and rolled. I swear my soul left my body, said one of the kids. It was very harrowing. We just couldn't come back here for a while, said the mom. Were you hurt? I asked, stunned. Just minor injuries. The police said it was really just miraculous how we all came out alive. The mom smiled. I nodded, glad for them, relieved to have my regulars back again. They said they couldn't bring themselves to come for a while because of the accident. But the kids kept asking, so tonight they decided to meet here for dinner. After I put in their order, I called my boss to let him know, because he'd been worried about them, too. He sounded delighted on the phone and told me he had some good news of his own. Carlos is going to pull through. He's awake from the coma, and he's now on the road to recovery. That's great. I said, even as at that moment something clicked, I typed all this up instead of leaving at the end of my shift tonight. I've been thinking about the old woman, how she looked, well, like death, or maybe more like near death. I keep thinking about how Carlos took a bullet to the brain, how the family of regulars were in a horrific accident, how all of them should have been dead, but they survived by a miracle. And I think I may have made a terrible mistake. So now, I'm terrified to leave the diner. Terrified because I didn't let her pay for my drink. I just don't want to know what happens next. Story 3. The Dog Man. Warning. Gore. Go to sleep right now or Dog Man will take you. My aunt said, trying to get me to sleep? What does Dog Man look like? I asked in my thin 9-year-old voice. He is tall. Yes, very tall. His head is a dog's. His body is human, and his ears are long. He can hear every sound. What does Dog Man do to kids? He takes them to the forest. He visits children who don't listen to their parents. He takes them away from their families and brings them to his forest. Will he take me too? If you behave, he won't take you anywhere. That was enough to scare me. I kissed my aunt and ran straight to my room, jumped into bed, and pulled the blanket over my head. Dog Man was a legend in our small village. Adults mostly used it to warn children. Sorry for changing the subject. I lost my parents in a car accident when I was 5, so I lived with my aunt in a small village. You don't have to feel sorry for me. I had long gotten used to it. My aunt's house was at the very end of the village, and beyond it was a large forest. No one my age lived in the village, so I had 2 options for fun. Either listen to conversations of the teenagers who sat in the village playground every night, or hang around in the forest behind our house. Because the forest was so big, I chose the first option and listened to the teenagers every night. I barely understood most of what they talked about. Usually politics, football, some recent event, or sexual stuff. Because of my age, they bullied me. But instead of sitting at home bored, I preferred being bullied by a few teenagers. One night, their topic was scary stories. One of them told some stupid, fake paranormal story his friend had experienced. Another talked about creepy noises he heard at night. These dumb stories were terrifying for a child like me. They must have noticed, because one of them turned to me and said, "Hey, Jack, are you scared? I don't want you wetting yourself and stinking up the place." To look brave, I said I wasn't scared. I wish I had told the truth. "All right then, prove it. If you can prove you're braver than us, we can take you to a hunt or something like that. What do you say?" "Yes, definitely," I said excitedly. "Then come with us." They took me to the forest at the end of the village. The howling sounds coming from inside terrified me. "If you want to pass the challenge, you have to stay in this forest for 10 minutes, one of them said. His voice was serious, but the others were holding back their laughter. "If you're scared, you don't have to do it. But if you don't, never ever come near us again." "But I don't want to. Dog man will take me." "All right then. Guys, if you don't want to watch a little brat whining, go back to the park." Everyone laughed, calling me a coward, and began to walk away. "Wait!" I yelled. "Okay, I'll do it," I said reluctantly. They immediately came back. One of them took out his phone and set a timer for 10 minutes. They said if anything happened, they'd be right here and help me. Then they sent me into the forest. The forest was very dark, but the moonlight was enough for me. I walked for a few minutes. The only sounds were my footsteps and my breathing. Even though nothing happened, I was scared, terrified. I stopped and looked back. The teenagers were tiny dots in the distance. They couldn't see me, so I decided to stay where I was. After waiting a bit, I planned to return, even if it wasn't exactly 10 minutes. But my plan was ruined by a sound, a rustling sound coming from a little farther away. I tried to calm myself. It was probably just a hedgehog or something. When I looked toward the sound and saw nothing, I felt relieved. But then another sound made me freeze, a low growl. I immediately turned to where it came from. It was there, 25 or 30 meters away, a figure, a tall figure, with a head resembling a dog. I froze for a moment. What I was seeing didn't feel real. I think it hadn't seen me yet. It was focused on something far away, standing completely still. Then it suddenly lifted its head, as if sniffing something in the air. I couldn't breathe from fear. When I finally gasped for air, what happened next would give me nightmares for years. The creature slowly turned its head toward me, its mouth wide open. Its teeth were sharp like nails. It made a sound like a growl, and we stared at each other. Maybe it was only a few seconds, but it felt like hours. I ran screaming. I expected the teenagers to be waiting for me at the forest entrance, but the bastards had left me. I kept running all the way home. When I arrived, my aunt was in the garden, grumbling while dealing with something hanging from a tree. "What happened?" I asked, trying to hide my shaky breathing. "Those assholes lit something like a firecracker and hung something on the tree. I'm dealing with that. Go to bed." I glanced at the tree. Hanging from one branch was a dog collar, long, silky red with white bone patterns. I ran straight to my bed. I couldn't sleep for a long time. Finally, I convinced myself that one of the teenagers dressed up as Dogman to scare me. That was the only way I could sleep. When I woke up in the morning, something felt off. It was around noon. My aunt hadn't woken me up. Normally she woke me at sunrise. Maybe she woke up late too. I got out of bed, and that's when I smelled it. A faint smell like meat. One of my nostrils was blocked, so I couldn't smell it fully. I assumed my aunt cooked something like pastrami for breakfast. I washed my face and went to the kitchen, but it was empty. I searched the entire house, but she wasn't there. I ran outside. I wish I hadn't. What I saw made me break down crying. My aunt's body was hanging from a dog collar tied to the tree. One of her arms had been ripped off and was lying on the ground. The flesh of her leg was completely eaten. Only the bone remained. Parts of her body had bite marks. Some chunks of flesh were missing. Her abdomen was torn open, some of her organs on the ground, some hanging out. Her body was covered in dark red blood. My crying brought the neighbors. When they saw the scene, they called the police. I don't remember what happened afterward. The police has kept the incident as a secret. After my aunt's death, I was placed in an orphanage. I stayed there until I was 20. Then, with the money I earned from a cashier job, I found a house on the other side of the country. I built a stable life, got married. My wife, Mary, gave birth to a daughter. I raised my child and enrolled her in school. Somehow, my mind managed to bury that memory. Now, let me tell you why I told you all this. Yesterday, my daughter asked what the thing hanging from the tree in our backyard was. I went to the backyard, and what I saw took me back 30 years. An old, silky, red dog collar with bone patterns. It's 2 a.m. now, and I'm writing this in front of the window facing the backyard. This time I won't let it take my family. I have my gun next to me. The backyard is dark. I can't see anything. But in the silence of the night, I can hear something. A raspy, huffing breath. Story 4, The Bonfire. I should have listened to Padre Jose. I should have stayed focused during the sermon, instead of catching Catalina's eye from across the pews, grinning like a fool every time she glanced back. But no, I had to be the charming rebel. The smirks, the stolen looks, all that felt innocent and playful. What harm could there be in love, right? Did you like the sermon today? I put a lot of thought into it. Padre Jose asked me at the door, his hand warm as he gripped mine. Yes, I did, Padre Jose. It was very good. What did you like about it specifically? All of it. It was very inspirational. I stammered. Thank you for saying so, my son. Just remember, I see all from the pulpit, and you will learn more about God from me than from your girlfriend. I looked down, burning with embarrassment. Catalina heard him too. She was by the hitching post, arms folded, trying to hide her smile. I walked up to her, trying to hide mine. Have you given any more thought to my proposal? I asked, trying not to sound as desperate as I felt. I have, but the Apache are attacking Albuquerque, and the Navajo are attacking Santa Fe. How do we know if we will be safe? Because mi amor, the Apache do not attack as far north as my brother's ranch, and the Navajo do not go on that land. They think it is cursed. We will be all right there. Her eyes searched mine, terrified and elated. Yes, I will go with you. We married the next month. Life on the ranch was not easy. The adobe house was practical, nothing more. 3 years of dirt, sheep, and quiet nights. We shared a wall with the sheep enclosure. It smelled like wool and manure, but we were together. That was enough. Until her birthday. I had saved up for months to surprise her with that bowl. The iridescent one we saw in Santa Fe. It shimmered like oil and water, purple and blue dancing under the sun. Catalina gasped when she unwrapped it. Called it the prettiest thing she had ever seen. Her eyes glistened. That made it all worth it. I broke my brother's main rule and lit a bonfire that night to celebrate her birthday. The lamb was roasting. The sky was clean, stars endless and uncaring. Catalina went inside to find a place for her new treasure. That was when I saw them. Eyes. Yellow. Too high off the ground to be a coyote. Not an owl either. Perito, my ranch dog, had been growling low all evening, but now he backed away, tail tucked. I want to go inside, but then who would watch the sheep? Perito was being useless. I threw a stick at the eyes. They shut. Heavy steps. Not away, just repositioning. Then open again. Closer. A new smell now, like the day after butchering day. Catalina came out, beaming. I found a good place. Go back inside. Actually get my gun. I interrupted, trying to sound calm. She did not argue, just quickly returned with my musket. The eyes had come closer. A shape now. Not a bear. Not anything I could name. My heart thudded as it stared. And then it spoke. Why did you not pay attention in church? Fernando, the voice of Padre Jose. Catalina screamed. Her whole body jerked backward. You should have paid attention. Again, Padre Jose's voice. Calm. Near. Catalina was trembling, voice shaking. We need to go in. All right. But as we moved my door, I got mad. I didn't ask for this, and I did not think. I raised a rifle and fired. The shot split the silence. The eyes disappeared. I pulled Catalina inside, slammed the door shut. I hoped it was over. But then the sheep started screaming. By morning, they were all dead, torn apart like paper dolls. Nothing left but ruined bodies. And Catalina was burning up, her skin gray and slick with sweat. Before she slipped into a restless sleep, she whispered, "Do not stare into his eyes." By the time I had buried what was left of the sheep and got Catalina something to drink, she was barely conscious. Her skin was damp and cold, though she burned with fever. I pressed a wet cloth to her head, whispering fervent prayers. I wanted to take her to a doctor. The nearest town was 7 hours by wagon, but the burro was dead too, ribs torn open like a rotten fruit. By the time I had our supplies packed, it was 2 in the afternoon. I would not make it far. I told myself it would be better to rest and start at dawn. Maybe it would forget about us. Maybe it only came when the fire was lit. So I did not light one. The dark settled in heavy and quiet. No coyotes howled. Even the crickets held their breath. At 9:30, the last light vanished behind the hills. At 10 o'clock, it started again. "Fernando," said the voice of Padre Jose, soft and pious. "Come out and pray with me. If you had listened in church, you would know how." Catalina whimpered. She was awake, barely. I crouched by the window, musket loaded again, though I doubted it would help. Then the voice again, closer. "Come out if you want to get your dog." My stomach turned. I had buried Perito. I had seen the flies. Rage surged through me. I threw open the window and fired. The flash briefly lit a shape, something tall, human but not, cloaked, no face. Then silence. As I reloaded, the sound began. Claws on adobe. Slow, dragging scratches. Whatever it was. It circled the house, tracing its claws along the walls like a child running a hand across a fence. It stopped at the door. 3 knocks. Polite. "I just want to come in and bless your house," it said, in Padre Jose's voice. Serene. Holy. Mocking. "No, you do not. You are bad." I shouted. The scratching started again, deeper now, which splintered with each slow drag. It was burrowing through the door. Catalina was beside me now, pale as the moon, leaning on the wall. "Mi amor, it is digging through the door," I said, powerless. "I will offer some food. Maybe we'll go away then." "What?" "No, you need to lie down." "Where's the basket?" "I have some tortillas and stew. I can offer it." "In the corral, but you cannot." "That is all right. I will use my new bowl," she said softly. She lifted the shimmering bowl from the shelf as if it were sacred and filled it gently, hands shaking. "I do not think this is a good idea," I whispered. "It will be through the door in a moment," she said. "This is our only idea." The scraping stopped. It was listening. Catalina lifted the door latch. The night sucked inward like a breath. She stepped out, holding the bowl like an offering. I was right behind her. "I am coming out with food," she said. Silence. Then in Padre Jose's voice, "Then bring it." We turned left. A figure stood just past the threshold of light. It looked like a Navajo elder, robed, unmoving. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then it moved. Fast as lightning, it struck the bowl, which burst into 1,000 pieces and flew out into the yard. And then it was on us. There are things the body remembers long after the mind stops. The sound Catalina made when the bowl shattered was not a scream. It was breath torn out of her, sharp and final. Then the night opened up. Something surged forward. I could not fight it. No weapon was fast enough. No words were holy enough. It did not just kill us. It obliterated us. And yet, somehow, I remember. I remember the moment the pieces of bowl hit the ground and exploded into dust. The land itself seemed to shiver, like something old had been disturbed. The creature, the skinwalker, moved too fast for Catalina to react. Her body collapsed like a rag doll next to the ruin offering. I turned and tried to run. Claws tore through my back. Blood filled my mouth. But the worst part, the final horror, was the voice. Still Padre Jose's. Still calm. There was an agreement. No home was to be raised here while the rivers flowed. That was the last thing I heard. Not the wind. Not Catalina's voice. Not even my own breath. Just that voice, as if it had always been here. Fast forward 167 years. A man named David is hiking north of Albuquerque. Looking for an old ghost town, he saw a mention on a forum. His boots crunch through brittle grass. He finds nothing from the forum, but ahead is a shape, an adobe ruin, slumped and half melted by time. He walks toward it. Then he sees them, bits of glass, half buried in the earth. Purple, blue, iridescent. Sunlight catches them like tiny bits of amethyst. The nearby doorframe is carved with deep parallel gouges. Too deep, too clean. Nothing out here does that. David stands very still. Something about the air feels wrong. He backs away. He does not go inside. He does not touch the glass. The wind shifts. It feels colder now. He assumes he is still cold from the river he had to cross. David turns around. He walks away, and he does not look back. Not once. Story 5, where the trees turn red. Some say it marched out of the sea under a bloody moon, here to expel our town of all hope. A monster to punish the naive prospectors of Maple Oaks who spent their gold on false-witch hunts. An avenger the young women burned at the pyre, drowning the land for rebirth. Others say it was summoned within the forest, rendering a body of shimmering water an ancient gateway. Not a monster, but a deity from a far-off pantheon to be used as a tool for occult ambition. It brought unrivaled life and good fortune to the woods and its creatures, warping the trees into divine guardians. I think it was just a man, an affluent founder who built our mines, our port, and, over time, fabricated fables around his locale, concocting utter, fictitious folklore bullshit with the natives that would live on through a local museum, and his descendants would follow suit, using fiction to hide the truth. For most of the history class of '85, such fiction ended their ambitious nonsense about our home's origin, with awe-inspiring malarkey attached. But for Ebony, oh, sweet, perfect Ebony, a switch had flipped in her mind, and an obsession with uncovering the town's secrets had taken hold. Some ancient remnant of this thing, whatever it was, must linger somewhere out there in the woods or across the shore. Legends need some grain of truth, right? As the sheriff's daughter, Ebony had every resource and privilege any eager 16-year-old could need to hunt local myths. But, for as keen as she was, her father still set borders. Go dig up the beach and explore the woods. That's fine. But don't go too far out. Don't go at night. Don't go alone if it can be helped. And, like any spoiled, rotten teenager, Ebony ignored all parental guidelines. This was her quest. She was invincible, under the guise of the moonlight. 2 days after she had returned home, by the oldest lake, they allegedly found her slumping out of the ground from where she buried herself in a burrow. Her legs were clawed up and gnarled, her clothes torn, her body broken. Whether she had tried to dig herself to safety after being attacked by wolves, or they came upon her while she was unearthing the mystery that lay under the dirt, remained unknown. For a time, rules began soon after the story broke, enforced by a grief-stricken sheriff. Beyond the threshold, the woods are forbidden, period. Yet it didn't prevent whimsical boys and girls from investigating the tantalizing, freshly rumored legend whispered quickly through the halls. Ebony's ghost haunts the forest. Go at night. Go to the lake, and you'll see the distraught phantom of a girl literally killed by her curiosity, still trying to uncover her mystery. So they instilled a curfew. As the sun dips behind those looming, timeless hills, notoriously unkind officers of the law patrol the streets to ensure no more wayward youths trek into the foliage. And for 30 years, for every family and every home, that same curfew has remained. For those same 30 years, Ebony's story has warped and demented itself beyond recognition as another generation learns of our nocturnal, ritualistic tradition. As another generation questions what she thought she found to warrant wandering that far into wild, in the dead of night. Had she seen anything at all? Or, alone in the woods, had something found her? And if so, was it still out there? I was a part of the latest generation, absorbed by the gospel of potentially abducted, lured, murdered, raped, cult recruited, tree fucking, or whatever sort of stupid girl she was 3 decades ago that made nightly outings impossible. I was a child when I first truly noticed the odd, sacred hush that descended over our home. My tyke brain finally acknowledging that our life wasn't typical. Inside autumn, lights getting low. Dad had called from the porch as the sun began its lazy bleed into the mountains. I sat in the kitchen, swaying on a stool, as my usually chipper mother locked every door and drew every blind, offering an occasional peek into the dark. Her lips pressed and her eyes narrow as her stoic husband stared at the clock. Think they'll hit the street early again? He asked her. Not likely. Confused, I asked them both, "What are you talking about?" My father looked at me, understanding that his little girl was now sentient enough to question what he found familiar, while Mom continued her routine checks. "Come here, kiddo," he said, usher me to join him by a window. "I'll show you." Through the curtain, I saw porch lights flicker awake down the street. Neighbors called or forced their kids home with a frantic sharpness. And then, way off at the road towards town, the low growl of a car engine began. Silent red and blue and purple headlights weaved between the trees, reflecting off closed windows where curious eyes met it. "See that car? The lights." Dad asked. I nodded. "A good, honest man drove one just like it. Once, he kept people safe. Until one day, he lost someone very important to him. Did he find them?" I asked him, too young then to comprehend the cause of his rooted, collective script we recited. A little lump formed in his throat. He did, but he tossed the words around in his head. They'd gone to heaven. Like Ani. Yeah, like Ani. And soon after, he went to heaven too. So now, that car and others like it, every night, carry on what he did. Keep us safe. Exactly. They keep us all safe. Mom muttered something profane to herself in the hallway. Dad, ignoring her, continued. But to do that, we gotta stay inside. They get grumpy if we get in their way. Understand? I nodded, slowly, as another voice spoke from the stairs. Do you see her? Sean, my delinquent older brother, who noticed, questioned, and listened far more than I did, asked our mom. Sean, Mom hissed, finally satisfied that our home was secure. His eager eyes scanned the room until they met mine, and a wave of embarrassment washed over him. See who? I asked quickly. Dad moved to block my vision as Mom yanked Sean to one side and spat harsh, but heartfelt whispers into his face. Peeking round his frame, I could see the two enter a heated argument of both passion and resentment. Dad moved my face to meet his. You'll catch on when you're older, Autumn. And older I became. I would come to learn that evenings belonged to the woods and whatever they held. But in our house, that created more wonder than dread. Sure, there was an unspoken caution, the yoke around our necks, but my parents never pushed panic or horror. Instead, their warnings glimmered with something closer to mischief, something my brother adopted far more than I did growing up. As the routines were finalized, and I came of age, Mom would click the kettle, and Dad would lean back in his chair to recount stories he called old myths, stories of monsters from the sea and of gods in the woods, and whatever other fables or fairy tales he could remember, stories Ebony had told him before she became one herself, a naive adventurer found half buried in the earth. Sometimes, I'd catch a glance between my parents, sharing knowledge, a private joke, or insight once hovering beyond my reach. They'd known her. They'd shared classes. They'd snuck out to go drinking in parks and smoke joints by the lighthouse lawn after dark. They'd loved her. And by God, they missed her, fascinated and frustrated and mortified by her decisions that night that shaped our town into what shaped us. Sean started to keep a notebook, scribbling down half-remembered details, little theories of his own, the finales of stories that never felt quite finished. I thought it was silly that he was becoming too obsessed like mom and dad's ghost friend. But I begged to hear more as much as he did. We'd crack that occasionally, and he'd spin a fresh version of some local rumor phenomenon or woodland oddity, and Mom would roll her eyes with a hesitant smile tugging at her mouth. They never pretended to have all the answers, and they never pretended that it didn't frighten them or that the fate of their friend troubled them most nights. But they offered pieces, fostering a hunger in their children to fit them, maybe one day, together. But that hunger would starve. When Sean became a young man and I became a teenager, we were wise enough to sense what they were too careful to admit. This curiosity would always be expecting, always listening, for answers that would never come, a puzzle left eternally unsolved, because we still had a curfew to respect, we still had rules, a tradition to honor. Be curious to your heart's content. Explore the part of the woods where you are allowed during the day before you reach the barbed fences. But there are borders. Don't go too far out. Don't go alone if it can be helped. And don't even think for a second about leaving the house at night, let alone going there. And like the good, well-raised children we were, as our curiosity grew bored, but never bored enough, we respected those borders. Until the one night we didn't. Until the one night I would tear my skin through bramble and feel dirt fester under my nails, warm blood on my face, and understand what was that dwelled out there, nested among crimson trees so foul and so beautiful. The daytime brought its own rhythm, and outside our fortress, life moved with the familiar patterns of any town. College was an odd blend of comfort and absurdity. My crowd, a strange but functional little crew, made such a blend bearable and sometimes enjoyable. There was Barney, with his bottomless backpack of books and anxious, bashful heart. Always armed with some obscure pulp fiction wisdom or dusty trivia, he dug up at 3 a.m. Kate, a brilliant, gothic dark cloud of sarcasm and wit, adorned in black lace and sharp eyeliner. Drifting among us like a raven that had learned to tolerate pigeons. She liked to draw. A myriad of dreamlike monsters filled her sketchbook, asphyxiating me whenever I saw them, as did the wonder that could rarely leave her mouth. Arthur, trouble on 2 legs, adored by every teacher he infuriated, and the first to disrupt the lecture hall. A cocky shit who always found ways to get us into places we shouldn't be, excluding one obvious exception. Detentions were a weekly event with him. Yet somehow, he was a charming glue that held us together in our worst moments. And finally, me, a theatrical ginger dweeb of fluffy sweaters and radiating rambles. A 4-pointed lopsided constellation, bright in our own humble little orbit. But then there was an occasional black hole that made its rounds, from a very, very different universe. Willow, she never drifted to our tables during lunch or lingered in the hallways with us. No, she floated above it all. Self-proclaimed queen bee of this backwater nowhere, daughter of the wealthiest family for miles. Founder of a circle of vixens and jocks who were always on the edge of danger. If she raised an eyebrow, the room would shiver. If she snapped her fingers, doors opened. Worse still, she was a white-haired devil whispering sweet nothings into Sean's ear, encouraging my brother to abandon all of his rules and barriers on half-baked promises. She was not our friend. Being noticed by her was a curse, not a blessing. Her name was poison in our household, detested by our parents. Many arguments spawned from the mention of her alone. But on one afternoon, in the buzzing cafeteria of flickering lights, scraping trays and pockets of laughter, she strode in alone. I was halfway through listening to Arthur T.'s Barney about the disaster of a date he'd had when, for only a heartbeat, the room fell out of focus as the cafeteria door banged against the wall, damning us into silence, and she marched, absent of her salivating little wolf pack, licking at her heels and beckoning to her every word. Her runway ready. Head-turning miniskirts and white leather jackets were gone, replaced by baggy sweatpants and an obscenely large hoodie, the sleeves swallowing her hands. She looked and moved like, well, the rest of us for once. And her face, Jesus, her face. No canvas of pristine makeup could hide the ugly, angry, blossoming blotch of red and purple bruising that nested under her eye. Every soul stared as their queen, out of place in her kingdom, made her way to an empty corner table with her head ducked and shoulders hunched. For those precious few minutes, she was just another girl, battered, tired, and alone, threatening to vanish into smoke if someone so much as called her name. And painfully, achingly slowly. The room soon returned to normalcy as its new corner-bound husk lurked at the edges of our vision. Something to gossip about. Barney kept sneaking nervous glances, bewildered at the sigh. Snowflake's looking rough today, huh? He whispered. Who do you think she annoyed? Kate arched a brow, sketchbook balanced on her lap, pretending not to look. Maybe her cult of plastic witches turned on her. Looking like shit does suit her, though, she muttered with a flick of her pencil. Arthur leaned in with a grin. Or she finally ran her mouth at someone who doesn't care who her daddy is and can throw a mean punch. Surprisingly, I found myself just feeling sorry for her. Everyone has a bad day. I said, not sure if I actually believed it or wished someone would say that about me if I ever sported a glistening shiner under my eye. Arthur gave a low snort. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Autumn. But not a cunt like her. Kate then nudged my arm. She was looking at you, by the way. Those words sent a prickle across the back of my neck. I timidly looked over, and true to Kate's word, Willow was staring at me from her exile corner, her hood suffocating her face. A silence choked our table, and for a moment, time itself seemed to slow. The cafeteria and its occupants fuzzed away, and all that existed was a space between us. Then she lifted her hand, and a single deer finger curled out from under her sleeve, demanded me to approach with a tiny, effortless motion, one that sent a shiver down my spine and threatened to drag me away from the safety net of my friends. I shook my head, and the sounds of the room returned. Arthur snapped his fingers in front of my face. Hello? You still with us? His voice was peripheral, diluted. Their concerned faces were smudges as they shot bewitching glances over at Willow. Willow? Willow wanted me. Barney reached for my arm as I pushed back my chair, mouth full of food. Don't. Let her sit by herself. Kate, never one to sugarcoat, muttered. Yeah. Sit down, Autumn. Don't be your brother. All while sketching a hollow staring shade in the margins of her book. Even Arthur dropped his usual act, scooting to try and block my path. Smug grin gone. Are you good? I wanted to listen. Really, I wanted to stay in our planted little pond and laugh at in jokes. But her eyes dragged me, practically led me on a leash, and I understood then how she could have charmed my resilient brother. Fuck, even looking like crap, she was mystic, humming in my veins while my better judgment screamed to shut her out. I barely noticed my body moving as I weave around disappointed hands and disgruntled groans and sighs. Logic was gone. Whatever she wanted, whatever grim story she had, I had to know, and so I let myself hopelessly drift to her table, into her dark mercy. She glanced at me as I reached her, her bruised face near unreadable, and then gave her attention to the divided room of interested and uninterested onlookers alike. No one was close enough to eavesdrop. Autumn, right? She beamed as I took a seat. Sean's sister? Who did that to you? She didn't answer right away, just shifted, hiding herself even deeper in the folds of her hoodie. I could almost see her weighing in her mind how much to say. Her eyes then snapped to a shape coming closer, dragging a chair in its wake. I didn't need to look to see who it was as an unstoppable surge of confidence came over me. Was it your dad? Sean pressed, seemingly having manifested out of nowhere, knuckles twitching, eyes flicking over the bruising. He looked over his shoulder at my confused, relieved table of watching friends, offering them a wave and a reassuring smile. Willow's laugh was a short, bitter burst. Oh, please. He wishes he were that brave. No, I just fell. Was it Ben? You overstepped. She paused and then nodded slowly. You've been seeing him without me? Sean asked. You haven't. Who's Ben? I chimed in. The two looked at me, as if remembering I was there, and suddenly I felt like a little girl in my parents' kitchen again. Local press, Sean said. Red hair, built like a stick dash, he nodded grimly toward his damsel. And the one who encourages his diva to believe she's above tradition. My stomach churned. You been out there? What, at night? I tried not to sound desperate, but the words pathetically dribbled out. A foul grin stretched across her mouth. I told you she'd be keen, she said to Sean. I almost hissed at my brother. You too. After everything Mom and Dad dash. I've not even left the house once. Autumn, I promise. Is that right? Willow teased. Yes. He spat, pleads and warnings written all over his face. And try as you might, nothing you or that alcoholic says will change my mind. He then ruffled my hair, pausing the racing curiosity that began to rush through my head. Or yours, I hope. Willow's gaze then met mine and held it. You know, I've heard things out there you can come listen to if you're not scared, Dash. Sean planted a firm, but hesitant hand on the table and stood with a huff. Catch you later, Wills. Always a pleasure. Oh, come on. She pouted. I won't take her past offenses. Even I'm not that stupid. Well, maybe just a few feet. We could all go together. The three of us. Her voice was thin and cold, but beneath all the bravado, I could tell she was terrified. The word left my mouth before I could stop it, when Sean was quick to usher me away from the table with not a word, like my life depended on it. Willow watched us the whole time, smiling from ear to ear with the utmost joy. Back to your friends, kiddo. Now. I don't. Why'd I dash? Autumn. Now. I nodded slowly and made my way back to my sanctuary as Sean reclaimed a seat in the lion's den. Whatever they said to each other was lost to me, but they remained a pair until the bell rang. His affection became more visible, tucking a hair behind her ear, cupping her hand, all while staring ditzy daggers into her. The rest of the afternoon was a blur. My friends hounded me, prying me with questions about what Willow wanted, what she'd said, what my brother had said, what the two of them were, and why in God's name I'd actually approached her. I deflected, lied, kept quiet, anything to keep them away. Yet their pestering was nothing compared to what the recesses of my own mind were doing to me. I replayed every word of that conversation, and through it all, one name kept cycling around. Ben, a man who could solve the unsolvable puzzle my parents had harmlessly planted in me. By the final bell, I couldn't bear any longer, and I folded. I confided in them everything I was thinking and feeling. Another rant bubbling out of my mouth in disjointed sentences that somehow they could understand every word of. Arthur proposed at first, stabbing a straw into his milkshake, after we'd escaped the spilling sea of student-filled halls, clambering their way outside to enjoy the rest of their afternoon, and sought refuge in a cafe booth. Why don't we pay him a visit? He took a long gulp of some vanilla delight. The others looked at him like he'd killed someone. Visit the jittery reporter who punched Willow in the face? Barney asked, digging into a slice of red velvet. What could go wrong? Well, either that or we break curfew ourselves and let this one. Kate began, poking me in the ribs, almost spilling my tea. Scratch your itch? It's not an itch, Kate. Oh, sorry. Unresolved compulsion then. Hey, back off. Arthur butted in, and I almost thanked him until I saw the look on his face. It's not her fault she got hypnotized by that white-haired bitch. They laughed at my expense. The stupidity, the absurdity of it all. And I did too. Barney pushed his glasses up. Have you considered another outlet? Like, read a book, Dash. Or get laid. Or write music. Kate seemed exceptionally excited about her own idea. I can already picture your first single. I was found dead in the woods at 16. You guys suck. No, we don't. Arthur clasped his hands together. Anyway, suggestion still stands. We visit this guy. Barney groaned. I don't know, man. Mom would always say Dash. Ugh, your mom says anything, Barn. And it ain't up to you, right, boss? The three of them looked at me. Arthur, eager and giddy. Kate, curious and cautious. Barney, frightened and shaking his head. Was I really going to drag him along to a far-off part of town to question a man I'd never met about local legends and parental bedtime stories, all storming from the unsettling words a girl, none of us liked, had given me? Of course I was. The local press office was a run-down, narrow building wedged between a dead laundromat and a fading convenience store, its red brick hull stained dark by years of rain and grime. Dusty, crowded windows made it impossible to see inside. Weeds poked the cracked pavement, and the front door barely held itself together on worn hinges. Yeah, no thanks. Barney squeaked, turning on his heel and walking away before Arthur tugged him back by his ear. Kate inspected the building, eyeing it up and down like a piece of abstract art. Did your brother mention why he or Willow talked to this guy? No. Marvelous. I didn't bother with knocking. I strode right up to the door and stepped inside, beyond an unmanned reception. A few desks packed the room, piled high with yellowed notepads, sticky notes, and old newspapers. The stink of old coffee, cheap booze, and burnt rubber attacked my nose as I ventured into rioting clutter. My boots scuffed against the fading floor as a fly buzzed in circles over an empty mug. Hello, I called. No answer. Kate gagged as she and the others filtered in behind me. You fuck. It smells like someone died in here. Arthur slapped the crack counter, fluttering a bundle of papers into the air. Perfect. I'm ready to see a ghost. How about y'all? You're more likely to see rats, Arthur. She added, trailing a finger over a dusty desk, painting lines and shapes. I found myself drawn to a wall of photographs, a timeline of the town's many faded celebrations and events. But nothing stood out. No mention of our town intertwined with a grand fate. No mention of a lost name. Barney at first hung back, overwhelmed by the smell and disorder. But even he soon found himself drawn in, and he shuffled over to a cramped bookshelf, overflowing with almanacs and faded paperbacks. Guys, he cried, peering down at the floor, come take a look at this. We gathered around, not knowing this would be the pivot point, as Barney stared at thin, dark streaks scarring along the floor, half hidden under the shelf. Arthur's hands immediately flew to its sides, and with a grunt he tugged hard. The unit groaned but didn't move. I chose to feel along the edge instead, searching for there. My fingers brushed a catch beneath the lowest shelf. A soft click sounded, and the whole unit lurched, swinging open on hinges to reveal a dark staircase, stretching down into the guts of the building. Oh, God, no, Barney whispered, with a tiny hint of uncharacteristic thrill. You fucking found a door, Kate said. What are you complaining about? And oh, God, yes, you mean? Arthur joked, eyes sparkling. Ladies first. He then added, gesturing for me to take the first step. I hesitated, only for a moment, before taking the first cautious step into the shadows with a shit-eating smile on my face. So quick, so easy, far too easy. No time to savor the anticipation. All eclipsed every worry, every rational thought, as the adventure unfolded before us. I soaked myself in thrills, each of my nerves shot with reckless curiosity, not one stopping to ask questions. It spat us out into a large, sweltering room washed in a sickly red glow. The stink of alcohol was more pungent down here, wafting through the stale air. Strings of thumbtacks and curling, ancient photographs lined the walls, a blurry picture of an old lake, a crowd at a festival, an evening shot of a rich, starry sky, figures vanishing behind trees, snapshots of a distance was bathed in purple light, wide-eyed faces from decade-old yearbooks, a lair adorned with the collections of a private investigator. Dilapidated, torn pieces of archived newspaper were neatly lined on tables, screaming local tragedies, accompanied by police forms, council records and government files that had almost bled dry of ink, margins etched with hastily scribbled notes. A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach as my eyes darted over them. Shut-away relics of decades past leapt from the pages and clamped themselves to my chest. They should have just been old stories, forgotten pains, but arranged together, they became an accusation. Search for missing hiker continues. Police abandoned search for missing son. Family left without answers. Search for missing girl continues. History repeats. Another youth vanishes near old mines. Strange light spotted by shoreline. Search continues for missing dog. Dozens of absent resolutions. The words began absorbing together. Search continues. Fucking search continues. Search continues. Search continues. No remains discovered. Nothing discovered. Nothing ever discovered. No one ever found. No bodies found. Not even one. I felt something rising in my throat I couldn't explain. The others had joined me around the table, reading the headlines we'd never known existed in silence, their faces tightening. A myriad of unspeakable, Unanswered losses moldering for at least 50 years. This was no adventure. This was a warning. Did Mom and Dad know? Local sheriff disappears. Foul play suspected. Community divided over nighttime curfew. Who was enforcing the new rules? Authority silent. Kate drifted away from the crowded table and let her attention settle on a map. Autumn. I ripped myself away, leaving Arthur and Barney to sift through more paper galore. The map was one of the woods, of course, riddled with illegible scrawls and red markings noting boundaries. But what had her focus was an old calendar taped to the corner, days crossed in black marker pen, others circled and annotated with different, tidier hands. Willow's name was infrequent enough to spot, and so was Sean's. My fingers zipped over clustered markings, piecing together how specific dates lined with shaded areas on the map. They'd been charting beyond the fences, but there was a threshold that even they hadn't dared cross. That changed tonight. The air pressed in and I couldn't breathe. I steadied myself on the edge of a table, shaking, head spinning, heart pounding like a kick drum in my chest. I didn't know what I wanted to find here, but this was not it. Distant and muffled. Their voices reached me and drew me back, a hand on the shoulder with some grounding words. Arthur said a joke, I think. Barney muttered something soft, and Kate held my hand. It wasn't grand, there was no fanfare, but it was enough. When I could finally speak again, it came out in a croak. What do we do? The question hung heavy in the air. Too many options. Go to the police and tell them what? Go to my parents and be put in solitary. Or, Arthur spoke as if reading my mind. We could go to the woods. Not a chance. Barney whined. I've not even been to the fences. None of us have. I'm not going there. And it's bear season, Dash. Kate couldn't believe what she heard. Bears. She gestured to the room we stood in. That's your biggest worry. Bears? Not the fact that will likely vanish into fucking Dash. Guys! I shouted, for what felt like the first time in years. Can we not argue, please? I then looked at Arthur. Get a picture of that map. Barney shriveled up into himself. No, we can't dash. Kate punched him in the shoulder. We can, and we are. Retracing our steps, we slipped back up the cracking staircase one by one, behind the battered front door. Afternoon had already begun its dwindling descent into dusk. I don't remember what we said to each other as we fumbled back out onto the street, making and questioning plans in the span of seconds, but I do remember who stood waiting for us. Sean leaned against the hood of his car, arms crossed, jaw tight. When our eyes met, he opened the passenger door and gave a single, sharp, commanding nod to the seat. No one spoke. Kate kept looking between us. Arthur bristled. Barney gulped, fidgeting with his pack. I eventually forced out a small, wavering smile as a revolting, impulsive thought overtook me. Perhaps it really was an adventure, a quest, but it wasn't theirs. Maybe we just go home and sleep on it instead. Clear our heads. Not a chance. Arthur pressed quietly. Arthur, it's late and I'm tired. I'll text you when I'm home. Promise. I lied. Are you sure? Kate asked slowly. I nodded, and she, unsatisfied, painstakingly gathered the others to start their walks home. But Arthur lingered. See you tomorrow. He said, more like a demand than a farewell. Even Barney showed some resistance, but they soon trailed off, leaving me on a darkening street. I slid into the passenger seat beside my silent brother, and the car door shut with a heavy finality. He watched my friends round a corner before he spoke. Do you want to go home? His question slowed the whirling storm in my head. The idea of home, its warm, routine normalcy, comforted me, but it did not scratch gnawing itches. I stared out the window, watching slivers of sunlight begin to hide behind the trees. No. Sean felt his jacket and produced his little, rugged notebook, its edges worn by years of restless fingers. Last chance. I'm sure. He managed a comforting smile. Okay. He put the car in drive, and we took off down the street. He navigated us through tucked-away, less-traveled roads before the scouts began their patrol, until we reached the town's edge. The car rolled to a stop in an abandoned parking lot infested with pine needles, the depth of the woods just looming beyond a bygone footpath. At a threshold, the tall, stark black shapes of thick, barbed metal fences, stretching for at least an acre and far higher than any man, try to wars away from the wild while they quarantine. Not tonight. Two figures waited beneath a flickering, dying light. Willow and Ben, red-haired, rail-thin, and staggering slightly on light feet. Sean killed the engine. A bird called from the trees as he made his way out of the car and towards his crew. I followed tightly behind, not sure what to feel, as Willow offered a happy wave while Ben's rickety fingers twisted around a heavy military flashlight. "Who's this?" he nearly slurred out. Willow answered before Sean could open his mouth. "His sister." "Huh. Impeccable timing, kid." An anxious energy came over Sean. "Hey, so maybe we don't go as far, Dash." He pointed down at me, the pathetic, nervous weight almost attached to his hip. Ben laughed. "Don't be getting cold feet. Shawnee boy, now you gotta tag along." Willow laughed too, and I pretended not to spot the tremble in her lip. Sean rested a firm grip on my shoulder. "We'll turn back if you find it too much, okay?" "Heads up," Ben warned, as a stream of red, blue, and purple lights danced over a hill and made their way down towards a lot. We were gone by the time they found Sean's car, crunching over brittle grass. We snaked through the woods until we reached the monolith. It seemed flimsy up close, a patchwork of tired metal smeared with rust and graffiti, and dead, segmented searchlights adorning the tops. They found a gap easily, a ragged hole crudely carved into the sheet metal, its rim twisted and sharp. One by one we slipped through, and my haste earned a few cuts along my sweater. For a mile, we pushed deeper in total silence, broken only by a clumsy step and a shiver in the wind. I caught glimpses of little X's marked on some trees and rocks as the path became rougher, revealing themselves when flashlight cones stroked over them. I saw a W+S carved into one maple tree, cuddled in a love heart. Willow's voice nearly scared my skin off. "Listen." Something changed, the voiding silence, gradually, warped into a series of coarse, pained echoing croaks originating from somewhere far, far ahead in the dark. The wind scratched and rattled its way through wounded, cracked bark as my ears strained and every instinct wailed at me to turn around and run. My brother took my hand instead, and we continued. "What is that?" I asked. "No idea," was all he could say. Night fully settled over the woods, the moon and the stars obscured by dense trees. I couldn't tell how much further we walked or for how long. I checked my phone. Dead. Impossible. Sean noticed. Hope he messaged Arthur. I hadn't. Shit. Before I could think, we came upon a still, unmoving river stream, flashlights glimmering across the shallow, black water surface. The three of them stopped. This must have been the edge of their familiarity. Ben charged forward, producing a Polaroid camera from a satchel. It was evident from the way he walked that his courage came from a bottle. I wondered briefly what kind of war waged in his head. As Willow went to follow him, Sean stopped her. We could leave him to it. He'll tell us anyway, whether we're with him or not. Willow let out a tiny laugh. "You want what I want, right?" Then she looked at me. "Having fun yet?" She broke away from him and followed the bobbing head of red hair into the breach. Sean sighed, hesitant to follow. "I'm not scared." I blurted out, "I know, but Dash." I watched sense and reason come over him in a single moment. It hit me, too. What the fuck were we doing? It lasted only a second. This lucid cut into the adventure, telling us to go home. Then, just as quickly, gleeful shouts and exclamations pulled us effortlessly onwards. Several meters beyond the river, one tree stood apart, a towering sentinel marred by something uncanny. A crimson mold covered its bark in thick, shulking veins, twisting and threading through its grooves like a cancer. The color was impossibly rich, both disgusting and hypnotic, and the texture looked more like a synthetic glass. Then it pulsed, dimly. A faint red glow breathed life within the mold, slow and steady, synchronized to the slow rhythm of a heartbeat. Willow was beside herself as Ben snapped a picture of the growth. Then he touched it. The mold trembled and released a cloud of faint, powdery spores into the air, which quickly scattered. A single red vein at the root of the tree flared to life, pulsating with more luscious light. It stretched along the ground. Its visibility was a complete defiance of logic, as if the earth itself was translucent. The vein bent deeper into the woods. Like sheep, we followed. Every single tree was consumed in the same lurid mass, shimmering in unusual palettes of red and garnet, some far more infected than others. Even the floor was terraformed by the stuff, puffing at our feet. The pulsing lights grew brighter as thick, euphoric fogs drifted among the trunks. Sweet and dizzying as the haze settled, the lights revealed the truth. Silhouettes, human and animal both curled, fetal and motionless, were encased and suspended within the bodies of the trees themselves. We should probably leave, Sean said, dreary and sheepish. Tell someone. I cannot explain why Ben chose to rush from the trees, tearing desperately at the mold in the panic bid to save the person imprisoned within. I can explain how the forest responded. The ground convulsed and split open, revealing worming interconnected tunnels beneath us, and a gangling thing emerged out at horrifying speed. Its towering, sharp humanoid body was woven of the same pulsing red mold, and it moved with an unnatural, sinewy grace as it mercilessly lunged towards Ben. It ripped him apart in seconds, splattering us as his flesh tore and bones snapped, his screams lost beneath the swelling heartthrob of the woods. The adventure was over. This was a nightmare. In the chaos and horror, a jolt of raw clarity rushed through me, my vision sharpened, and the soft charm of the woods lifted as I held my breath. I became pitifully aware of the creature's sounds as it clicked and hissed, feeling and searching around its vicinity. It had no face, no ears, no eyes, no mouth. It moved in tandem with the mold's pulse. Sean came to the same conclusion. I did as his hand found mine. He reached into the folds of his jacket and threw his notebook as far as his arm would allow. The creature spasmed and dove to where it landed, clawing and tearing into the ground, shredding the bundle of leather and paper. Sean's other hand found Willow's, silent and stiff, and we ran. It was a desperate flight back through the woods, Sean's grip fierce as the monster splintered and wrenched after us. Each step we took triggered a poof of blood-red light to burst from the mold, guiding the thing to us. Every stumble, every cut and scrape, every gasp seemed to vibrate the air as it pursued, tracking our every pace, tireless and quick, but just far away enough. Then we splashed over the river. I spun back to see it halt amidst the thicket, shaking, uncertain. Its senses dulled. The network of mold beneath it had almost broken. Then it gagged and yelped as the ground opened again, reclaiming its soldier. The silent trudge back felt much shorter than the journey in. As we reached the hole in the fence, a searing flash of purple light erupted around us, obliterating the dark. Out of the blur, stern men in dark suits swarmed forward, barking muted commands. They swept us up, herded us away from the woods. No explanation, just tight grips and hurried steps and lights drilled into my eyes. It was numbing. Everything passed like a shutter click. The lights, the door, the engine of a police car, the sirens, the walk up my porch. My parents, wild with terror, embraced Sean and me with questions spilling out of their mouths. But all I could do was collapse into their arms, unable to look them in the eye. My bedroom has never felt this cold, this quiet. There are slashes up my sleeves and across my hands. My knees are scraped, a gash is across my leg, and I think some of Ben's blood is stained in my eye. No pain pulses in my temples. Not mine, not entirely unpleasant. I think my brother feels the same. I see it when I close my eyes. Not a monster from the sea, nor a god from the woods, nor a ghost girl by a lake. Just mold, a beautiful red mass, and a warm tree to rest my head. Half of me is convinced to grab some kerosene and a match. The other is a compulsion to go again. I can go deeper, further, much, much further. Maybe I'll bring my friends. Why can't it be their adventure? Two. Story 6. It wasn't just a rash. It was one of those rare Saturdays that I had nothing going on, though I wasn't much of an outdoors woman. To fight the boredom of a long summer day inside, I went on a hike. I say hike, but what I had planned was nothing more than a walk through the woods on the edge of town. Still, it gave me something to do. Bag packed. I hopped into my car and parked near the trailhead I'd seen from the road countless times. The warm air surrounded me as I stepped into the shade of the dense forest. I savored the forest air in deep breaths. The only sounds were the wind rustling the leaves and my own footsteps. The peace, the seclusion. I had made the right decision. At least I thought. Despite being my first time hiking, the thrill of it all had me feeling adventurous. So when the trail passed alongside a glistening lake that I never knew even existed, I did something very unlike myself. I stripped down, folded my clothes neatly on a nearby log, and waded into the water for a swim. The sun was bright, the water startlingly cool. I swam for maybe 20 minutes, drifting through the center of the lake until I felt I was pushing my luck. Surely, someone would see me before too long. I climbed out of the water and let the sun dry me off. I got dressed and finished my hike. I felt accomplished, like maybe I had become the sort of person who went hiking. On my drive home, I noticed a rash for the first time. A red spot circled by inflammation, raised slightly, about the diameter of a quarter. It looked like a bite. I called it one, dismissed it as one, tried not to inspect it too much. But the next morning, it was larger. The red circle had widened to the size of a golf ball, slightly raised above the rest of my skin. Not itchy, not painful, but impossible to forget. Over the next few days, my hand kept moving back to it, drawn there subconsciously, lingering on a growth that felt inert until once or twice it didn't. By the end of the week, the rash was nearly the size of a baseball, darker red now, bulging, almost taut, and I would swear I felt it move. That's when I went to see Dr. Rodney. He was a jolly man, unassuming, habitually kind, the sort of doctor you don't mind visiting. I believed he'd prescribe a cream and send me off with mild reassurance. The face he made when he saw my leg indicated otherwise. He said, leaning in to inspect it more seriously. Let me check something just to be sure. He returned a device that resembled a magnifying glass. But where the glass would have been, there was a round screen. When he swept it over my leg, he muttered a single word low, almost to himself. Corrid! Then he looked at me. Riley, he said, and the jolliness was gone. Have you been swimming in Gem Lake? I hadn't known the name of the lake, but the fact that I was being asked told me I probably was. I went swimming in the lake last week. I said, Ryan Corp really needs to do something about that mess, he muttered, pacing once in a tight circle. You've been infected with a parasite called a corrid. I looked down at my leg, at the swollen red membrane, trying to picture what was growing underneath. Can you get it out? I asked. He shook his head solemnly. That's part of the bad news. Corrids wrap themselves around important anatomy. They can do catastrophic damage when disturbed. He must have seen the terror in my expression, because he softened a bit, leaning in. Oh, but we will take care of it, he said. Here's what I need you to do. And he told me the rules. Pack your bathing suit in your car. Do not shower. Do not enter any water whatsoever. When you feel the urge, the pull toward a body of water so strong you can hardly resist it, that means the cord is almost ready to emerge. When that happens, call me immediately. Come here, no matter the hour. I tried to ask more questions, but Dr. Rodney was light on answers. I think he was trying to protect me, but all it did was give me more to worry about in the days to come. I tried looking up cords on the internet, but the search came up dry. Whatever was inside me, it wasn't common. As if I could. I tried my best to live as normal in the days to come, but I spent an inordinate amount of time staring at the lump on my leg, which was taking on more revolting properties by the day. Besides continuing to grow and moving much more regularly, I could now see a black mass pass across the surface of the lump every so often. It took everything within me not to cut the thing out myself. Almost anything would be better than remaining a home to this mysterious and revolting creature. Though the days dragged, by Monday afternoon, I felt what Dr. Rodney said I would, the urge to get into a body of water. It came on subtly at first, but as soon as I detected it, I got changed into my bathing suit, hopped into my car, and sped over to Dr. Rodney's office. But by the time I pulled into the parking lot, the urge was so severe that I almost plunged myself into the fountain in front of the building. I didn't even stop to think twice about how strange I must have looked heading into a doctor's office in my bathing suit. Dr. Rodney was waiting for me in the lobby and led me into a back room. There in the center of the white-tiled exam room was a large metal bathtub already filled with water. "Get in," he said. I didn't need the instruction. I don't think I could have lasted another moment outside that tub. The draw was so strong. I had never felt anything like it in my life. "What do I do now?" I asked, turning to Dr. Rodney, but only in time to see the door slam behind him. My heart skipped a beat. "Hello?" I shouted, but a small slot in the door opened, and Dr. Rodney's face appeared on the other side. "I'm sorry, Riley," he said, "but there are certain liabilities that prevent me from being in the room with you. Contamination risks and other dangers. But I'll be right here walking you through every step." I wanted to argue. I wanted to jump out of the tub and bash open the door. But it's not like my body would even allow me to do that. With a defeated sigh, I said, "Fine. What I do now?" "The cord will soon emerge. It releases a powerful anesthetic, so you won't feel a thing. But whatever you do, don't disturb it until it's full exited your body." I did my best to remain calm. Deep breaths. I felt the cord moving rapidly inside me, but the lump remained sealed. Soon, however, something began to poke at the apex of the mound on my thigh. The skin grew taut as something black pressed hard against it from inside. It broke through, releasing a thin strand of blood into the water. I shuddered and squirmed, but couldn't look away. Soon a thin, black, worm-like appendage was slithering through the ever-widening wound. I grasped the edge of the tub in a desperate effort not to reach down and yank the thing out of me. It just kept coming. Long, slimy, and fluke-like, it wriggled out of my thigh with painstaking slowness. My nerves were shot. I heaved deep, nervous breaths as my eyes were locked onto the thing emerging from my body. It may have been 2 feet long or longer before the last of it slipped from my open wound. I freaked out, reaching for the cord which was gliding through the water near my knee, and tried to toss it out of the tub. It was a mistake. The thing, which had until now moved slowly and lazily, stiffened up at being touched and then flashed, recoiled back and bit me in the arm. I managed to toss the thing onto the tile floor, but not without ripping a large gash out of my upper arm where its mouth had attached. Bleeding from my arm and my thigh, I scrambled out of the tub and toward the exit. "Let me out," I shouted, banging on the door. "I can't open the door while the cord is still alive," Dr. Rodney said calmly. I turned around and froze. The cord was changing form. While it appeared in the water to be a long, worm-like creature, the cord actually had limbs, for black appendages split off from the center of the thing. 2 of them functioned something like legs, while the other 2 wriggled wildly up near its gaping mouth. It hissed and snapped its jagged teeth at me, but didn't come any closer. "There's a bat on the table over there. Kill the cord, and this will all be over." I rushed over to the bat, keeping my eye on the monster before me, expecting it to strike at any moment, but it remained planted in place, shaking. I stepped toward the cord, bat raised over my head. It snapped, it flailed, but it didn't approach. Just as it was near enough to take a swing, it pounced far faster than I could have expected. My swing missed, and it latched onto my calf. Pain shot through my leg as I tried to shake it off with a kick, but it held on. I struck at it wildly with the bat, hitting myself as often as I hit it. But eventually something worked, and the cord released. That's when, with as much strength as I could muster, I brought the bat down squarely on the awful thing. It shrieked and feebly tried to writhe away, but my next strike fell, and then another, greenish, grew splatter from the cord as I bashed the motionless heap in a terrified frenzy. Finally, shaking and out of breath, I dropped the bat and burst into sobs. Dr. Rodney was by my side shortly after. "I'm sorry I had surprised you like that. I didn't want you to worry too much beforehand, but you did a great job," I responded, but I doubt it was decipherable through my hysteria. Let's get you patched up, he said. 15 stitches later, I was walking out of Dr. Rodney's office on my way home. And while I'm happy to be cord-free, my mind still goes back to that lake. Every once in a while, the urge rises in me to go back for another swim. Story 7. I clean cabins on a tourist submarine, and it's expensive in more ways than one. Trigger warning. Gore. Working on a tourist submarine has been an experience. I'm in charge of cleaning 15 floors of mostly empty cabins, and as it turns out, it's pretty dang expensive to book a casual trip on the ocean floor. Go figure. Something you might not expect, though, is the sounds. Whales, water pressure, the whine of the engine, and sometimes the unexplainable. To give a little context, as I'm sure you're confused, let's put it this way. Have you ever felt like you're being watched? Down here, it's not only the cameras keeping an eye on our distinguished patrons. I heard it call my name. It knew things about me, and it watches them too. In the lowest section, where the steam generators relentlessly churn away and the high-pressure pipes hiss at you as you walk by, something dwells in the shadows. Its eyes always calculate, always studying. It all started months ago, right here on the Seabed Continental. I was doing my nightly rounds, having just finished cleaning the guest cabins, and making my way down to the crew deck. That's the first time I heard it. I checked my watch, walking down the creaky stairs. 2:56 a.m. For days, every time I checked, it always hovered around 3 in the morning. The red light they use on the lower decks is great for night vision, and more than a little eerie, especially the way it played with the steam and made the already dark corners look like something might just reach out and grab you as you walk by. I turned the corner leading to the generator room. The smell of Terrence's burnt chili still stuck in the air, and that's when I heard its voice, a chorus of everyone I ever knew and infinitely more than I could recognize. Christopher, it said matter-of-factly. I stumbled back, smacking my head on a low-hanging pipe. As much as it hurt, I was too scared to scream. As I rubbed the back of my head, my ears strained against the usual white noise. Nothing, not even Jerry, who's usually singing sea shanties around that time. Just silence. But I felt it ahead, behind the steam generators, just out of sight. The shadows stretched there, searching the feeling. That was it for me. I scrambled back towards my dorm, determined to call it a night. The captain would have my ass in the morning. But I didn't care. 3 days, it said as I barged through the door. I was going crazy, I thought. But it was right. The next night was when things started getting weird. It seemed like every time I turned the corner, I could see its eyes like red marble surrounded by glowing blue light, unmoving and all-seeing. In the men's washroom, they stare at me from a crack in one stalls as I wipe the mirror. In the kitchen, from the vents as Kenneth said something about how his wife might be cheating. I told him that it's part of the job. After the long night, I retired to my dorm. As I laid down to catch some shudder, they bore into me from the cracks, the shadows. Everywhere they might have hidden, they were there. I buried my head under my pillow, trying to ignore it. It didn't care. Bring them to me, it said, directly into my mind this time, and for some reason, I knew exactly what it meant. It wanted the patrons, their ring fingers specifically. Now, as much as I wanted to please the supernatural entity plaguing my every waking hour, I couldn't go around chopping off fingers for obvious reasons. So, I knew I needed to talk to someone about all this, and the only person who might have believed me came to mind, Jerry. On the second night, I found Jerry singing about mermaids and those unfortunate enough to stumble close enough to hear their wails. He was peeling potatoes, one finger missing, his brown and gray beard stained yellow at the sides. His eyes crinkled into a familiar, welcoming smile as I approached, a missing tooth winking from his grin. "Hey there, Swabby, what can I do you for?" he said in his usual upbeat tone. I leaned against the counter and took a deep breath. The words blurted out of me. You ever feel like you're being watched? My cheeks grew hot when he didn't speak straight away. Jerry placed the peeler on his lap and stroked his beard. Now, ain't that a question? What do you reckon is watching you, lad? I tapped my fingers against the stainless steel. It wasn't like I had anything to lose. I thought, there's a entity on the ship. It's watching me and everyone else here. The words felt stupid leaving my lips. I couldn't look him in the eye. Jerry hummed, his smile gone. He stared at the bucket of peeled potatoes for a long moment. He had never spoken so seriously before. It don't like to wait. It won't wait. I was frozen, speechless. Jerry knew what it was, and he must have dealt with it in the past. I went to speak, but he started back up with the potatoes. Do what you gotta do, lad, and do it fast. I felt like there was nothing more to say. I backed away and made for the generator. There, I would find my answers. The steam generator seemed to cry out as I neared the door. I twisted the handle. It screeched as metal scraped against metal, then clicked. I pushed it open. The red light wasn't quite bright enough to see far into the back. I clenched my fists and took that first step. Nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Pipes spat out steam as I skulked towards the hulking generators. Light shifted and bent the closer I got to the rear. Inky shadows swallowed the back of the room, a blob of wriggling mass that pulled me in like it had its own gravitational pull. Sweat burned my eyes and dripped down my nose. My calves knotted as my body tensed. It shot out like vines, wrapping itself around the hanging lights, inside the turbines, and around my legs. When it touched me, I felt the whole ship. I could see everything it saw. Married women with married men, expensive champagne, photos of vacationing children. It wanted things to be right, its version of right. My legs grew weak, and I fell to the floor. Why? I demanded. This is what you want. Your ex-wife found out firsthand. No, I didn't. Then the shadows erupted into a tidal wave. My wife's muffled cries filled my head. I remember the feeling of her cheek under my foot and the weight of the garden shears in my hand. I savored the sick crunch when the sharp steel cut through bone and the warm, sticky blood that covered my digits as I picked up hers from the floor. I buried her ring finger in the backyard under the tree we had planted after reciting our vows. A searching tentacle swam towards my forehead, and at the same time its voice grew the size of the ocean. Bring them to me, one finger for each year an unbroken vow. It slithered its way into my eyes, wrapping its claws around the soft meat inside. It tore itself free, taking a part of me with it. Profound emptiness settled in my gut. A deep cold washed over my emotions. I became less. When I opened my eyes, everything was clear. I pushed myself up and made for the utility closet, clamping the large pair of bolt cutters. I gave a few snips, admiring the way the rubber grip fell in my palms, then hoisted it over my shoulder. Some people don't know what's important anymore. I said, the words drawn out of me, the creature's joy settled in my ribs, its purpose seemingly fulfilled. I smiled, but it felt forced. Jerry stood at the entrance, ankles crossed, nursing a cigarette. He nodded at me. You don't have to embrace it fully, lad. He took a long puff, then threw the butt onto the grated floor in an explosion of embers. This is what freedom costs. His eyes hardened. My stomach dropped as he pointed towards his ring finger. Pay the price or join the others. I looked down at my left hand, thinking about all those cabins I'd have to clean tomorrow. It'll be harder with 9 fingers, I said. You get used to it, lad. Story 8, Tourniquet Wasps. For months ago, I achieved something every entomologist dreams of. I discovered a new type of insect, not just a new species, but an entirely new family of Hymenoptera. I'm not writing this to brag. This is not a dissertation or some grand scientific paper. I've been assured local officials have been informed. So you can read all about the biology of these things whenever their experts publish something. I will not be taking part in those studies. Just typing now, remembering them, is making me sweat and shake. But I have to get this down, if only to prove to myself that it's real. A few months back, my team received a grant for a field study. An invasive species of locusts had been wreaking havoc on a corporate farm, and we were tasked with finding a means of halting their spread. General pesticides had proven ineffective, so the goal had become to slow their reproduction. The dispatch group consisted of myself, my husband Ian, and our junior researcher, Muhammad. We were transferred from the airport to their facility via helicopter. A picturesque sunset washed over the endless plains with an orange glow. A soft breeze rustled through the tall grass, appearing as a sea of grain. It was Muhammad's first time riding a chopper, and his excitement was contagious. Can you believe we get paid to do this? I flinched at his shouting as it erupted through my headset. You don't have to yell, Med. The mic works perfectly fine. Sorry, Becca. It's weird to get used to. He didn't even glance in my direction, the scenery proving too captivating to look away from. Don't blame him for getting excited, Ian chirped, nudging at me. How could you not when we're in a helicopter? I recoiled at the volume again, as did Muhammad. Oh shit, he mumbled. Is that what I sound like? Ian's boisterous laugh came through the headset, a mix of elation and mischief. No, I retorted. You're much less annoying. That brief interaction should have been savored for what it was. We had no way of knowing it would be the last normal conversation we would ever share, but it vanished as quickly as it took Muhammad to look back out of the window. Wait, he said. Was it always doing that? He pointed to the top of the glass. Small bursts of smoke shot into view before dissipating in the wind. We shared a look of concern before the pilot's voice rang over our channel. The rotor is malfunctioning. Buckle up back there. It's about to get bumpy. We were already strapped into our seatbelts, but Muhammad grabbed tight onto any railing he could wrap our fingers around. Ian and I grabbed each other. The cabin began shaking, lightly at first, but quickly grew to a nauseating rhythm. It felt like each vibration knocked another screw loose. More smoke flooded the window, and I felt my stomach seize as a helicopter began to lose altitude. We're going down. The pilot was screaming over the mic. He sounded as panicked as we were. I'm not ashamed to say I was crying. Muhammad was yelling louder with every inch of descent. Ian, the beautiful, perfect man he was, stroked my hair. I heard him shout, I love wide dash before the crunch of impact, and I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was still strapped in the chair. I felt warm metallic liquid and hands smearing it across my face. The inside of my head both sounded and felt like a church bell. I smelled the industrial rot of burning metal, and my eyes shot open as my brain caught up to my body. The neon red emergency lights blended with the soft glow of dusk through a haze of mechanical smoke. I was freed from shock by the two hands on my face. They pulled my attention forward and made me focus on Ian's face. Beck, you're okay, baby. Tell me you're okay. My head leaned forward into his palms and shot back up as the adrenaline stabbed my senses to full alert. I felt the blood on my face as clearly as I tasted it. My neck felt tight, like the vertebrae were trying to escape, but I was alive, and so was he. Ian? What hap dash? I heard the deepest sigh of relief escape his lips, only matched by the one I'd heard when I told him I loved him back. Sure, it's okay, baby. You're okay, we're okay. I'm okay too, asshole. Muhammad was slumped on the door of the cabin, a makeshift sling tying his left arm into place. His unwavering grin was gone, replaced by a mixture of anguish and fear. I tried to stand up against the harness and rip what was left of it out of its fastenings. I listed for a moment, but caught myself before I could fall. What about the pilot? We each haven't checked yet, Ian stammered through difficult breaths. You were only out for a minute. I grasped the handles of the door and yanked, but scrap metal and burnt wires were sealing us inside. I didn't see any fire, but I felt the temperature climbing. I looked over to Ian, who had helped Muhammad to his feet. Ian, the door! I shouted. He leaned Med onto the seat next to them and wrapped his hands under mine. We pried it open with several ear-grinding scrapes. I was too eager to get out of the cabin. Overestimating my physical state, I hopped to the ground. My legs felt non-existent, and they buckled beneath me. I hit the dirt. Hard. Fuck. I hollered. Becca, you all right? Fine. I croaked. The ground wasn't where I thought it'd be. Armed with the knowledge of my idiocy, he climbed slowly down the side. He took my hands in his and asked if I could stand. I told him I could, and he hoisted me up faster than I expected, somehow making the ringing in my ears worse. Muhammad was next. We both guided his body down as he struggled with one arm, grunting with every step he took. When his boots hit the ground, we each took a few steps back and finally saw the complete state of our would-be chariot, as well as its pilot. It was impossible to tell if the impact had killed him in the fire or the glass shards embedded into his body. The windshield was entirely blasted away. Soot had caked itself across the exterior, and stones of all sizes were buried into the metal. It was a sight I couldn't stomach. I fell to my knees and threw up. It splashed my hands and caked smoldering earth across my skin. Muhammad didn't faint, but the view had taken his legs as it had taken mine, and he fell back on his ass with a pained groan. Ian joined the two of us on the ground. Once my stomach was finished turning itself inside out, I sat back and fully took in the wreckage. It was a heaping, smoking thing that barely resembled what had taken off. Flames encased the cockpit and spat from the top. The blades had been completely torn off, and it was mangled all the way to the tail, which had snapped off and planted itself a few dozen yards ahead of the impact. I realized we were sitting in the long crater it had plowed into the earth, 30-something feet long and deep enough that I couldn't see out from my hunched state. At the time, I remember wishing I could thank the pilot for whatever emergency landing he had used to save our lives. But now, knowing what surviving would cost us, I wish I could have killed him myself. I shook my legs to make sure they would work this time, and got them underneath me to check out where we landed. The sun had fully set about a half hour before, but through the dimming purples and oranges in the sky, I could see a faint light illuminating the direction we'd been flying in. That way, I pointed. The farms we were headed to are massive. If we can just get to the outskirts, we can probably find somebody to help us. We were still about a half hour out. Ian chimed. That's a couple of hours of walking, and it'll be too dark to see soon. We have to find some kind of shelter until dash. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw my face again. Baby, I'm so sorry. I forgot you were bleeding. He had also forgotten the blood trickling down his own leg. Really? I hadn't noticed. He put his hands on my shoulders, and I could tell he was starting to work himself into a panic. Are you okay? Does it hurt? Where does it hurt? I'm fine, Ian. I think the blood stopped, at least from my head. I remember seeing a medical kit next to my seat. I'll be right, dash. I firmly grabbed his shoulder. The helicopter is on fire, Ian. I'm not letting you fry yourself to treat a scrape. You, however, I gestured his leg. You definitely need something. Start with pressure. I'll see if I can get a piece of fabric ripped off. I heard a heads-up whistle from behind me, and turned just in time to catch the backpack Muhammad tossed on the ground. I always bring bandages, Becca. It's literally in my job description. Muhammad was beaming, clearly happy to be helpful. You're getting a raise, Med. I said over my shoulder, wasting no time in wrapping the cut on Ian's leg. And it's not even my birthday, he chuckled under his breath. Muhammad had made it to his feet and trudged his way out of the trench. He took a moment surveying the land before he looked back at me. Becca, what would it take to get yet another raise? Maybe if you have a jeep somewhere in this pack. What about some promising shelter? I gave one final tug to tighten Ian's bandages and stood up at the word. I didn't respond, instead climbing to reach his level. Sure enough, a smooth mound of rocks was peeking over surrounding brush, a wide mouth carving a promising entrance. I put my arm around Med's shoulder and patted his chest. I'll see what I can do. I placed Ian's arm over my shoulder. A few minutes passed, and we were sitting on the cold stone floor. The fading shock left us more sore by the minute. My head throbbed with a dull pain. I know now that it was a concussion. Muhammad felt like his arm was going to fall off, a worry he relayed every few steps, but Ian had it the worst. The cut on his leg had reached deep. I didn't see bone when I applied the bandages, but the blood hadn't stopped and was pushed through his wraps with every limping step. Despite my own pain, I sat upright and rested Ian's head on my lap. At this point, Muhammad was lit more by the stars behind him than the faded sunlight. He sat himself at the mouth of the cave and looked out cautiously into growing night. "Becca?" he asked. "Yeah." There should be a flashlight and a lighter in the front right pocket of my bag. "I'll grab some grass. You take the flashlight and grab anyone you can find. It's going to get fairly cold, and we can't be half frozen for the walk tomorrow. Plus, we don't know the fauna of the region. Might be helpful to keep them at bay." Okay, I huffed. It was all I could manage. I removed the flashlight from his bag, kissed Ian's forehead, and trudged my way out. It took a while, but I put together enough with the hope it had burned through the night. When I got back, Muhammad had formed a solid base of grass. "Took you long enough," he jeered, even with the light pointing away from him. I could sense the sarcastic smile on his face. I was beginning to think we'd have an uncomfortable cave floor sleepover. Ian joined in, his voice regaining the charm I was concerned would drain out of his leg. "It's not the floor, we're outside. This is what's known as the ground." I began structuring the broken branches and bark over the brush. "Is it though?" Muhammad retorted. "Once we're in a cave, are we technically inside?" This was the original inside, if you think about it. I took my seat away from the fire and pointed the light directly into his eyes. "Light the fire, lighter boy, or no rays." The talking ended, the fire caught, and we felt okay for the first time since we crashed. At least I did. No telling what the other two were thinking. After a few minutes of silence, Ian was already asleep. My attention had settled on the stars outside, hoping they wouldn't be the last I ever saw. Muhammad, however, broke the silence with a whisper. "Becca, do you see that?" I snapped to attention and turned towards him. "See what?" He was staring deeper into the cavern. "I don't know. I just need to know if you can see it too." I followed his gaze and only saw darkness. After a few seconds to let my eyes adjust, I caught it. A hint of flickering light, reflections of the fire. It looked like a dozen tiny mirrors were gently swaying in and out of view, their full form hidden just outside of our camp's light. I stood up a little too quickly, and my head throbbed with pain again. "Yeah, Med." I rubbed my forehead. "I see it. I thought you had checked out the rest of the cave." "With what light flashlight, girl? You'd have me stumble around with a lighter while Ian bled out by himself." "Jesus, I get it. Could you just watch him again? I can check it out. Yell if you need anything." I gave him a barely illuminated thumbs up before slowly stepping through jagged rocks that cut deeper into our shelter. The closer I got to the glistening image, the more confused I became. The flashlight's beam allowed me to see a clear hole in the innermost wall, about 3 feet wide. It looked like the walls inside this hole were covered in scales at first. The motion I had mistook for swaying was more of a folding and fluttering, as if the cave itself was trying to shed its interior lining. What initially seemed to be orange in the glow of our flame transformed into an iridescent mix of blue, purple, and green in the white light of my torch. I knew even before I saw clearly into the hole. We were camped right outside of a hive. The cavern inside the hole was huge, maybe 20 by 20 feet, and every square centimeter was occupied by a pearlescent exoskeleton. They didn't react to the light, nor my footsteps as I approached, entranced by this alien sight. I've been obsessed with insects since I was a child. I dedicated grade school, under and post-grad, and a doctoral degree on their study. These things were different from any species I had ever come across, even just researching. The closest bug I can think of to their appearance would be a tarantula hawk wasp, for their size, shape, and stinger, but that doesn't paint a perfect picture. Tarantula hawk wasps have a subtle teal coloring, only appearing at specific angles of observation. These practically shimmered in the sodium light, as if an aurora was captured inside each carapace. Their wings set them apart as well. Where most wasps and other hymenopterans have thin wings that rest along their back, there's jutted straight out on either side of the thorax, more akin to the shape and color of a violet drop wing. They either sat motionless or lightly brushed over their neighbors, refracting light across the room in uneven shutters. Lastly, wasps of the size are usually solitary. They hunt and nest on their own, raise young and die. Whatever species this was, there must have been hundreds, if not thousands, lining the walls beyond the hole. I instantly recognized the potential of what I was looking at. A new class of insects sat dormant less than 10 feet from me. I slowly backed away and almost skipped back to Muhammad. "Mad," I whispered too loudly, unable to contain my excitement. "There's something in there, maybe a new species of wasp or fly, but it's incredible." He immediately sat up from his slouched position against a large rock. "If you're lying, it's not funny and you're a bad person. Take the flashlight and check it out for yourself. Just be quiet. I think they're sleeping, and as pretty as they are, they look mean." "Roger, look after your man while I check it out." As Muhammad followed my path, I woke Ian with the excitement of a child waking her parents on Christmas morning. "Ian, baby, wake up. There's a nest of some kind in here. A brand new species. I think they might be wasps of some kind, but their biology is almost completely foreign to other Hymenoptera." He looked up half awake, his eyes slowly widening with each word. "Ian, this could be an entirely new evolutionary line. I've never seen anything like it." "Becca, that's incredible," he said weakly. "Where's Muhadash?" He was cut off before he could ask. Muhammad's voice cut through the quiet night with a sharp, terrified scream. A scream that was almost immediately drowned out by a cacophony of buzzing, beating wings, and clambering mandibles. I only had enough time to see a glistening cloud of chitin hurtling towards Ian and me. My body moved on instinct and fell on top of my husband in a hopeless effort to shield him. They were instantly upon us. Thousands of sharp legs, those beautiful wings beating across my body. The buzz was so loud, I felt like I was going to drown in it. I couldn't hear Ian or myself, no matter how loud we yelled. I felt him writhing beneath me, mixed with the feeling of every crawling thing that slid between us. It was too overwhelming to focus on any one sensation. All we could do was hold each other. I don't know how long the swarm lasted. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but I know Ian and I were on the ground for a while after it ended. We screamed into each other's arms until Muhammad pulled us apart. We sat in a circle, each of us making sure the silence was real. I broke the stillness and frantically checked myself, shaking every article of clothing as hard as my muscles would let me. I slapped my hair, threw Muhammad's bag away from me, and nearly pulled my feet off as I shook my boots. Ian and Muhammad followed suit, all of us engaging in an ungraceful dance of slaps and gagging. "What the fuck? What the fuck did you do?" I screamed at Muhammad. I didn't do anything. I thought you said the light wouldn't do anything." "It didn't. I shined a light at them and nothing happened. You must have done something." "Oh, for sure, Becca." I walked over and swung my dig-around dash. "Guys, please," Ian interrupted, and my ears are still ringing, and I'm not certain it's ever going to stop. I just woke up to a swarm of wasps the size of my face. It's too much right now. I can't deal with this shit right now. He was rocking back and forth, the stutter he left behind years ago crawling out his trembling body. The sight almost forgot Muhammad was there. I wrapped an arm around his shoulder and scratched his back up and down. "I'm sorry, Ian. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to yell. I'm sorry, Med. I've never been scared like that of bugs, you know?" My words hung in the still air. Muhammad looked apologetic, but if he had words to say, they were locked behind his own fear. He ran his hand through his hair and let out a big exhale. It was at that moment I saw it. A welt. At first it only looked like a prominent pimple, a fleshy bump of red peaked with oozing yellow bile. Med. I hesitated. "Beck, I swear I don't know what happened." "No, it's not that. What's that on your hand?" He looked, flinched, then seemed to realize he was in pain. The shock of the swarm faded alongside the hum of the insects. He collapsed to his knees, reaching for his wrist but recoiling in pain from his other arm, still misaligned from the crash. His hand shook, and I rushed toward him. I lifted his hand to see the sting clearly, and nearly vomited at what I saw. It wasn't shock that had blocked the pain. The wound was growing. not uniformly, but in a straight line, poking from the lump towards the outside of his wrist. It undulated, seeming to breathe, and stretched a little bit further, which each imitated exhale. Before I could even relay this to Muhammad, I heard Ian scream louder than any sound I had ever heard him make. I turned to see him clutching his bloodied leg. A panicked expression plastered across his pale face. He had also been stung just above the line of his boot. A slowly growing crease of flesh creeped from the blood-red spot. Just the same as Muhammad's, it seemed to be inching upwards, wrapping around the base of his calf. I'm ashamed to say I didn't start making a plan. I saw their injuries, my friend and the love of my life, and for a moment I only thought of myself. I frantically checked my body for the same welts, but found nothing. I was swarmed, same as them, yet I was entirely bereft of any stings. However, my search did yield something. While my eyes scanned for stings, they instead caught the warm light of the fire reflected in 2 blue exoskeletons. 2 corpses for 2 stings. I didn't let them distract me for long. I quickly rifled through Muhammad's bag and produced the final 2 bandages he had brought. I handed one off to Ian and began wrapping Med's arm. It proved difficult from his shaking, but I managed to clinch it tight. Ian finished wrapping his leg, despite the sweat pouring from his palms. Change of plans. I exhaled. We're leaving now. It's a few hours to the farm. We can make it by sunrise if we hurry. I don't know if Ian can make it on that leg. Muhammad whimpered. No, fuck that. Ian grunted. I'm getting out of the sea cave now. I'll crawl if I have to. I'll help you up in a second, I said, scurrying toward the dead insects. I removed my shirt and gingerly placed each body on top of the cloth. Seeing them this clearly, I was able to make 2 observations. They each had large antennae, a swollen thorax, and a wide abdomen. I couldn't be certain without seeing the rest of the hive, but they appeared to share the same physicality of queen wasps. Furthermore, their abdomens appeared to have burst. While common among most species of bees, this immediately struck me as odd for a wasp, especially of this size, even more so as a result of a singular sting. I folded the specimens into the cloth and placed them in the bag. You're seriously concerned with bug bodies right now. Muhammad chastised. You're seriously not concerned with the possibility of needing a new, never-before-synthesized antivenom right now. There wasn't a response. Just the silent realization of an impending doom he hadn't considered yet. Leaving. Now, Ian said through gritted teeth. I helped him to his feet, placed his arm around my shoulders again, and began the long walk toward the dim light off the farms on the horizon. Muhammad clutched a flashlight in his unstung hand, swinging both injured arms awkwardly with his steps. I knew the light wouldn't last us the whole trip, but in my desperation, I didn't care. It would get us closer to salvation, and that was all that mattered to me. Over the course of the first hour, Ian leaned more and more of his weight on me. It wasn't on purpose, just a result of the increasing pain in his leg. His grunts grew louder with each step, only occasionally interrupted by Muhammad's. We could only see what the flashlight illuminated. We were alone in an ocean of darkness and knee-high grass. I almost welcomed the bites from the normal insects that peppered us like rain, and the night's cold that sharpened me against the mental fog of my concussion. I think it was about 2 hours of silent walking before Muhammad broke it. Ian, how are you feeling, man? My leg hurts, Med. How about you? It's my whole arm now. I'm starting to lose the feeling in my fingers. My toes went a few minutes ago. Becca's being a trooper. I was too out of breath to respond, and too scared to think about anything other than my next step. Have you looked at yours? Ian asked. Not since we left. I don't think it'll help to see it. I had the same thought. Can't do anything about it now. I'm scared, man. I am too, Med. So we just keep walking? We just keep walking. Another hour into the night, we finally saw actual lights ahead of us instead of their immaterial glow. I was almost entirely carrying Ian. I took their advice and didn't try to look at their stings, but I could hear Ian's foot dragging without purchase underneath him. Muhammad hunched over in a gradually crumpling silhouette and cried softly into the empty night, only contested by the rising hum of locusts. I had almost forgotten why we originally came here. Guys, I forced out, we can make it. Just another hour and we'll be there. Becca, Ian said, so quietly it could have been a whisper. Do you remember when we first met? I struggled to form the weakest NHM ever uttered by a human being. I saw you at that conference, and I knew more than anything I had ever known before, that you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and that I would do anything for you. I hoisted him higher for the 1,000th time that night, my legs threatening to shatter under his weight. I had the same thought, Ian, as soon as I saw you. I've never been more certain of anything, until this moment. Now, his leg gave. I felt the shift, and in an instant, we were going down. He fell on top of me, limp, pinning me underneath his entire weight. I screamed with the last ounce of voice I had, and pushed. I pushed and pushed, strained every muscle in my body, and eventually rolled him to my side. I squinted through the absolute dark, and could see his eyes flickering between open and shut. He was alive. I stood, my whole body spinning as I searched for Mohammed's light. I didn't find him standing, but instead saw the beam shining from the ground a few feet ahead of us, obscured by the grass. I rushed over, and through the light saw what they had refused to. Muhammad was barely conscious. His limbs were splayed in each direction, giving me a full view of his arm. The whole thing was turning purple, and his hand had completely eclipsed purple and was shifting toward gray. Impossibly dark veins stretched across the skin, bursting into small patches, creating thick, blotchy spots of brown across the whole rotten thing. Though the sting was still wrapped, the subdermal line that first appeared as just a few centimeters had grown massive. It snaked through his skin, wrapping around and around and around, slithering up the entire limb and disappearing into the sleeve of the shirt. I screamed Mohammed's name, but whatever havoc was being wreaked on his body had removed any awareness he could have had. Thinking about how his arm looked, I think that's the one blessing the sting provided. I grabbed the flashlight and sprinted back to Ian. I don't know what I thought I was going to do to help him, but in seeing Mohammed's state, I had to be by his side. If I could change anything about how I acted in that moment, I should have just kept moving. Seeing what happened was worse than any fate I could have imagined for him. I pointed the light towards Ian's leg, and it was revealed to be in the same state as Mohammed's arm. The outline of whatever sat beneath the skin had spiraled from his ankle to his thigh and into his shorts, leaving his leg the same blend of decaying purple. His knee had stepped at a bad angle at some point and snapped, bending incorrectly on the ground. The blood flow must have already completely halted by that point, because Ian never reacted to the injury. In another act of complete desperation, I lifted his shirt and removed his pants in an attempt to see where this crawling line was moving to. My hand recoiled to my mouth as a silent scream took over my face. The bandages dressing the cut he had gotten in the crash had slipped off, and through the split flesh I could see something. The twisting vine that had killed his leg was some kind of living amalgamation of the yellow ooze that had dripped from the initial sting. A worm about inched across the open wound, forcing itself through my husband's body inch by inch. I realized that I couldn't see it continue above his waist. The worm extended into the leg of his briefs and disappeared. I reached to remove them before Ian started shaking. It wasn't violent or spastic, but shiver, a persistent convulsion across his entire body. I didn't know what to do. I could only place my hands on either side of his face and cry whatever words I could think of, which turned out to be a mix of his name and please over and over again. Through my pleading, I heard small noises begin stir inside of him, snapping, squelching, ripping, skittering, humming. I didn't think about what was happening to him. I just kept saying his name, wishing he would come back to me, and to my horror he did. For an instantaneous, horrifying moment of lucidity, he looked at me. In those seconds, I saw him realize what was happening to him and feel every sound I had heard. Then his eyes rolled back, and with one final sickening tear, he was gone. I fell back and pushed myself away. I couldn't see everything, but I saw enough. Blood poured from his groin, seeping into the soil. It looked like the blood itself was moving. Of course, that wasn't the case. More of those things were on the ground, fluttering their juvenile wings and cleaning viscera off of their heads with their front legs. The crimson red struggled to mask their iridescent shells. The firstborn were already taking flight and vanishing into the grass. I don't know how many were spawned. They were still pouring out of him when I got to my feet and began sprinting. My shoe hit a puddle that I knew was Muhammad's. But I didn't stop to look. I didn't stop to breathe. I didn't stop to scream. I didn't stop to think. I sprinted until I made eye contact with confused farmhand, where I lost consciousness. I woke up in a clinic, though it was simply a large tent. The equipment I was hooked up to was state-of-the-art. I didn't have time to admire it, though. Even before I had fully come to, I was screaming. I never remember my dreams, but I'm certain of what this one was. The nurse at my bedside immediately ran to grab the doctor. I thrashed and cried and called for Ian and Muhammad, only stopping once I was sedated. When I came to again, it was much calmer. Good thing, too, because I could tell the well-dressed woman sitting in front of me was of importance to the people that paid for our grant. Good evening, Dr. Haas. How are you feeling? I tried to sit up, but the wooziness of sedation kept me down. Alive. The woman sat upright and straightened her blazer. That's good to hear. My name is Miranda. I've been told you were found alone by one of our workers. There was a pause as if she was waiting for a response. She didn't receive one. There were 2 others with you. Judging by the state you were found in, I'm to assume they've passed. I struggled to nod as tears began to drip down my cheeks. Truly, my deepest condolences, Doctor. Was a result of the helicopter malfunction? I inhaled through gritted teeth and shook my head no. Did it have anything to do with the specimens we found along with your belongings? I could feel the terror resurfacing, but I managed to quell it enough to nod again. Please, Doctor, whatever information you can give would be of the utmost importance to my employers, for our workers' safety and for your recovery. So, I told her the story, taking breaks to cry or to hyperventilate. I needed to be sedated twice, but by the following morning, she had all of the information you do. Other doctors in suits occasionally joined, but Miranda was the only one who could stomach the entire thing. When I was finished, she did her best to comfort me as much as her corporate demeanor would allow. She told me I'd receive compensation as a victim of their equipment malfunctioning, and that I would be flown back stateside as soon as I'd like. It took me 3 more days to feel at all comfortable flying again. It's taken me a long time to write all of this down. Every time I've sat down to type it out, the tears come back, as do the shakes. Thinking about it all over again, it's overwhelming. As you can imagine, I can only get a few sentences out at a time, but it's important you all know this. I've done the math. Theoretically, those things can reproduce at an unprecedented rate. A hive of queen wasps that, through one sting, can create an entirely new hive. Maybe it's only through humans, but they could possibly use other mammals, reptiles, birds, or even fish. I'm sure research has been underway for months now. The only thing I'd be curious to know at this point is where they came from. I'm a woman of science, but if there's a hell, these creatures are its latest creation. They may not be a danger in my biology, but I'll always remember that last look Ian gave me. Nothing of this world should be able to do that to a person. Story 9, The You Woman of the Western Roads. Sharing this story of mine has been a long time coming. I used to be a lorry driver for a living, or to an American, I used to be a trucker for 14 years. I drove along the many motorways and through the busy cities of England. Well, more than a decade into the job, I finally had enough. Not being a lorry driver per se, but being a lorry driver in England. The endless traffic and mind-crippling hours away from the wife just wasn't worth it anymore. Talking to the missus about this, she couldn't help but feel the same way. And so she suggested we finally look to moving abroad, although living on a schoolteacher's and lorry driver's salary didn't leave us with many options. My wife then suggests we move to neighboring Ireland, having never been to the Emerald Isle myself. My wife reassured me that I'd love it there. After all, there's less cities, less people, and even less traffic. That's all well and good. Love. But what would I do for work? I question her, more than skeptical to the idea. A lorry driver, love, she responds, with quick condescension. Well, a year or so later, this idea of moving across the pond eventually became reality. We had settled down in the southwest of Ireland, apparently considered by most to be the most beautiful part of the country. Having changed countries but not professions, my wife taught children the village, whereas I went back on the road, driving from the south, up along the west coast, and stopping just short of the northern Irish border. As much as I hated being a lorry driver in England, the same could not be said here. The traffic along the country roads was almost inexistent, and having only small towns as my drop-off points, I was on the road for no more than a day or two at a time, which was handy, considering the missus and I were trying to start a family of our own. In all honesty, driving up and down the roads of the rugged West Coast was more of a luxury than anything else. On one side of the road, I had the endless green hills and mountains of the countryside, and on the other, the breathtaking Atlantic coastway. If I had to say anything bad about the job, it would have to be driving the western country roads at night. It's hard enough as a lorry driver having to navigate these dark, narrow roads which bend one way than the other, but driving along them at night, something about it is very unsettling. If I had to put my finger on it, I'd say it has to do with something one of my colleagues said to me before my first haul. Padraig, a seasoned lorry driver like myself, welcomed me to the company by giving me a stern but whimsical warning about driving the western counties at night. Be sure to keep your wits about ye, Jamie boy. Things here aren't what they always seem to be. Keep ye eyes on the road at all times. I tell ye, and you'll be grand. A few months into the job, and things couldn't have been going better. Having just come home from a 2-day haul, my wife surprises me with the news that she was now pregnant with our first child. After a few days off to celebrate this news with my wife, I was now back on the road, happier than I ever had been before, driving for 4 hours on this particular day. I was now somewhere in the northwest of the country, although I pretty much loved driving through every county on the western coast. The northwest was a little too barren for my liking. Now driving at night, I was moving along a narrow country road in the middle of nowhere, where outlining this road to each side was a long stretch of stone wall. And considering the smell of manure now inside the cab with me, I presumed on the other side of these walls was either a cow or a sheep field. Keeping in mind Padraig's words of warning, I made sure to keep my wits about me, staring constantly at the stretch of road in front of me, guessing which way it would curve next in the headlights. I was now becoming surprisingly drowsy, with nothing else on my mind but the unborn child now growing inside my wife's womb. Although my eyes never once left the road in front of me, my mind did somewhat wander elsewhere. This would turn out to be the biggest mistake of my life, because cruising down the road to the fog and heavy rain, my weary eyes become alert to a distant shape now apparent up ahead. Though hard to see through the fog and rain, the shape appears to belong to that of a person, walking rather sluggishly from one side of the road to the other, hunched over like some old crone. This unknown person appears to be carrying a heavy object against her abdomen with some difficulty. By the time I process all this information, having already pulled the brakes, the lorry continues to screech along the wet cement, and to my distress, the person on the road does not move or duck out of the way, until, feeling a vibrating thud inside the cab, the unknown person crashes into the front of the vehicle's unit. Or more precisely, the unit crashes into them. Bloody hell. I cry out reactively, the lorry having now screeched to a halt, frozen in shock by the realization I've just ran over someone. I fail to get out of the vehicle. That should have been my first reaction, but quite honestly, I was afraid of how I would find them. Once I gain any kind of courage, I hesitantly lean over the counter to see even the slightest slither of the individual, and to my absolute horror, I see the individual on the road is a woman. Oh no, 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 no. But the reason I knew instantly this was a woman was because whoever they were heavily pregnant. Jesus Christ, what have I done? I scream inside the cab. Quickly climbing down onto the road, I move instantly to the front of the headlights, praying internally this woman and her unborn child are still alive. But once I catch sight of the woman, exposed by the bright headlights shining off the road, I'm caught rather off guard, because for some reason this woman, she wasn't wearing any clothes. Unable to identify the woman by her face, as her swollen belly covers the upper half of her body, I move forward, again with hesitance towards her, averting my eyes until her face was now in sight. Thankfully, in the corner of my eye, I could see the limbs of the woman moving, which meant she was still alive. Now, what happens next is a whole unbelievable part of it. But I swear this is what I saw when I come upon the woman's face. What I see isn't a woman at all. The head was not the head of a human being. It was the head of a ewe, a fucking sheep. What the... I believe were my exact words. Just as my reaction was when I hit this thing, I'm completely frozen with terror, having lost any feeling in my arms and legs. And although this creature, as best call it, was moving ever so slightly, it was now stiff as a piece of roadkill, unlike its eyes, which were black and motionless. Its mouth was wide in a permanent silent scream. I was afraid to stare at the rest of it, but my curiosity got the better of me. Its ewe's head, which ends at the loose, pale skin of its neck, was followed by the very human body. At least for the most part, its skin was covered in a barely visible layer of white fur, or wool. Its breasts, not like that of a human woman, were grotesquely similar to the teats of a ewe, a pale sorvena pink. But what's more, on the swollenness of its belly, I see what must have been a pagan symbol of some kind carved into the skin, presumably by a knife. The symbol was of 3 circular spirals, each connected in the middle. As I'm studying the spirals, wondering what the hell they mean, and who in God's name carved it there, the spirals begin to move. It was a stomach. Whatever was inside, it was still alive. The way the thing was moving, almost trying to burst its way out. That was the final straw. Before anything more can happen, I leave the dead creature and the unborn thing inside it. I return to the cab, put the gear stick in reverse, and then I drive like hell out of there, remembering I'm still on the clock. I continue driving up to the border before finishing my last drop-off point and turning home. Though I was in no state to continue driving that night. I just want to get home as soon as possible. But there was no way I was driving back down through Northwest, and so I returned home, driving much further inland than usual. I never told my wife what happened that night. God, I can only imagine how she would have reacted, and in her condition nonetheless. I just went on as normal until my next haul started. More than afraid to ever drive on those roads again, but with a job to do and a baby on the way. I didn't have much of a choice, although I did make several more trips on those northwestern roads. I made sure never to be there under the cover of night. Thankfully, whatever it was I saw, I never saw again. Story 10, Rotting Through. We moved into apartment 304 on Willow Manor 30 years ago after a messy divorce where my ex-husband kicked me and our 6-year-old son out of the house. I had to use up all of my savings so I could pay the deposit to my landlord. He was a man in his 70s. He was an intimidating man who looked tired of life itself and would only speak a few words when necessary. He was kind enough to let us also move in Bia, our German shepherd. Even though the apartment was tiny and had barely any room for my son and I, it was either that or throwing her out to the streets and breaking my son's heart. They were best friends. Ever since I gave birth to him, she was always by his side, almost like a second mother. Every time my ex would scream at me and break things and is drunken, Bia would sit guard outside Matt's room. Later, when I would gain enough strength to stand up and go to the bathroom to treat my broken nose, Matt, and Bia would follow me and just watch. They were both powerless to do anything to help me. We got out of that house after my ex decided that he no longer wanted to waste his money on raising the child he wanted me to keep. I should have been thankful for getting away, but now it was my duty to be responsible for my small family after years of forced dependency and abuse. I had no clue on where to begin. After moving in the little furniture I had managed to get and settling in, it was time to apply for my first ever job. There was a small convenience store below the apartment building, and luckily, they could afford to hire another cashier. The pay was hardly enough to pay the rent and necessities, but we managed to survive. The first months were peaceful, and we were getting used to a quiet home. In the evenings, after walking Matt back home from school, we would sit on the couch and watch TV with Bea laying by the front door. She seemed wary of the apartment from the beginning, almost like she could sense something we couldn't, but I appointed that to her adapting to the new place. When nighttime came, Matt and I would sleep together, something we would never do when living with his father. I wanted to make him feel safe before letting him sleep in his own room. Sometime later, our opposite neighbors moved out, and we were the only apartment left tenanted on the third floor. The layout was strange. There were 4 apartments in total, and we lived between 2 others with one opposite to ours, and the elevator was on the far right of the hallway. It wasn't long until the noises started. I woke up one morning from the sounds of drilling on the wall, and I thought that we had new neighbors, so I decided to go out and greet them. I opened the door, and there was no one there, but I could still hear the drilling. I thought the sounds were coming from an apartment above us, and didn't pay further attention. From this point on, there would be construction sounds almost every hour of the day, to the point of giving me major migraines. Therefore, I contacted the building manager to ask him if he could tell them work during reasonable hours. Nonetheless, he said that there is no construction happening in the building right now, and that I should be patient until it's done. I didn't want to fight with my upstairs neighbors, so I kept my mouth shut. A few months later, it was November, and Matt's 7th birthday was coming soon. My birthday gift to him was decorating his new room and getting him a small bed with whatever money I managed to save up from my job. He was ecstatic to finally have his own room and not having to share the bed with me, which made me a bit sad, but I understood that he was getting older and he should start being more independent. While I was setting up his desk, I noticed a small hole in the wall that I'd never seen before, but I came to the conclusion that since the house was really old and run down, it was subject to be damaged here and there. The wall where the hole was a party wall between our apartment and the one next to ours. 303. It piqued my interest to look through it and maybe see through next door, but the hole was tiny and I could only see darkness. Matt was never the type to wake me up at night crying, but after moving to his room, that's what he was doing every night. He was saying that there was a tall, long-bearded man watching him sleep while standing by the door. My ex-husband had that exact description, so I amounted it to all the trauma he had caused me and my son all those years. Maybe he was afraid that he would return and destroy our lives once again. At least that's what I believed at the time. Between my son waking me up every night and sounds from upstairs, I could barely get any sleep, and I became an agitated mess. My patience was running low, and I stopped spending time with Matt. All I would do after work was lock myself inside my room and try to relax. As time passed, the hole in the wall was getting larger. It started leaking and growing mold. I would clean it every morning, but by the next day the spots would be back, and I barely had any money left to hire someone to fix it. Matt would refuse to sleep by himself, and Bea would never enter the room. She just whimpered at the door. My once calm and quiet dog started running around the house, constantly barking at every minor sound she heard, and barely ate. She was really old and used to spend most of her time laying on the floor, but during this time, whenever I took her out on a walk, she did everything she could to keep me from bringing her back home. Eventually, they started sleeping with me again, removing any form of privacy I had left in that tiny apartment. Finally, I decided to lock the door to Matt's room and ignore whatever was happening inside until I could get someone to check it out. We were miserable. I dreaded the moment I would have to return home from work and see my son. He would ask me about that figure all the time. I tried to convince him that it was a fiction of his imagination because I didn't want to believe something else was going on. He was too young to understand that we couldn't leave, and I felt horrible that I couldn't do anything. He was scared and paranoid of the house. He reminded me of how he was before we left. All I wanted to do was lay on my bed and not have to deal with any of this, but I had to take care of him, otherwise I would become like my ex, and I hated to do that to Matt. I promised him that our lives would change after moving out, and I would finally make him feel happy and protected. My then current situation would not allow that, though. I had escaped one nightmare. and came to find another, perhaps even worse one. At least previously we had each other turned to, but now it felt like it was me against Matt. I had become the monster, and trust me, I tried so hard to prevent it, but there was something inside me that had changed, broken. This is how our days would pass. We almost completely stopped interacting with each other, and it felt like we were strangers living inside the same house, not a family. Even Bea had changed. She didn't want to pet her anymore and would turn and walk away from me. I hated myself. The smell coming from the locker room was unbearable. It smelled of decay and dampness. I hung air fresheners everywhere I could cover up the smell, but it did little to help. The towel I put below the door was soaked with dirty water, and I was afraid to unlock the room and see its current condition because I knew there was nothing I could do about it. It felt like there was something inside threatening to come out, and the door served as a false sense of security. It wasn't there to protect us from it, but to keep the illusion of safety. The house was slowly rotting, and so were we. It was a prison, but it was either that or living on the streets. I was the one responsible to protect my family, and that had taken a huge toll on me. Sometimes I felt like a helpless child masking as an adult. I had no one to turn to. It was about time I did something about our situation, and my only option was to ask my landlord to switch apartments. I did not want to spend another day in that house. By the time he visited, the door to the room was almost completely black from the mold infestation, and I was terrified to open it after so many months. It felt unnatural to enter the room. It was nearly pitch black from the lack of windows, and as the black mold had reached the walls, the smell was so intense you could almost see it in the air. The hole had gotten so large you could pass through it if you crouched. My landlord was furious, thinking that we damaged the room, and he absolutely did not believe me when I told him the truth. We approached the hole, tried to avoid stepping on the dark liquid and the pieces of debris, and looked through it, expecting to see through into apartment 303, but all we saw was a broken wall of stacked bricks. The apartment building was initially built in the 1800s and never completely deconstructed, as it was considered in a good enough condition to renovate it and let desperate people with little to no money move in. That brick wall had probably been there for decades. We were nearly fully packed up and ready to move out by the next morning when the renovation crew arrived to clean up the mess. The dark bedroom was filled with people and light. I felt like a huge weight was lifted off of my chest. The crew had disassembled the bricks to clean the source of the mold, and behind it they found a small pool of liquid with human remains swimming in it. Someone was literally imprisoned inside the wall built brick by brick until they suffocated. I was horrified to the thought that we were living with a skeleton for so long, and I left my own son sleep in the same room with it. I did not want to learn anything more about it. All I wanted to do was leave and never look back. My landlord insisted on us moving into another apartment on another floor for half the price until I found a different place to rent. I decided that we needed a change of scenery. Thus, after looking through many ads, I found a place in a different neighborhood, and we moved out of the building as soon as it was possible. I was glad to leave, but the lingering fear of what was revealed stayed with me for many years. Sometimes I walk past my old neighborhood, and I still feel the same dread I did the day I looked at the hole for the final time. Even though the building has been taken down, living on Willow Manor seems like a horrible nightmare now, and I'm glad that my son was too young to remember anything from it. I've never been completely honest to anyone about what took place there, perhaps out of embarrassment for my inability to protect my family from that horror. Talking about it makes it real, and I prefer to remember it as something I never truly experienced. Last story, The Woman in the Trees. It was either joining a gym or taking up hiking. I wish I had joined a gym after my breakup with Carl, and after a much-needed period of shameless self-pity and wallowing. I knew that I needed to do something positive, get active again, and feel good about myself. I decided on hiking for a couple of reasons. I had never been an outdoorsy type, and I wanted to prove to myself that I could challenge myself. I had gotten so comfortable, too comfortable, I suppose in my relationship, it was time to get out of my comfort zone. Plus, I liked the idea of the solitude hiking would bring me. I needed time to think and reflect. Well, let's just say I didn't get that part right, but I definitely found myself out of my comfort zone. Way out of my comfort zone. After spending far too much on a pair of hiking boots, a day pack, and some other hiking gear, none of which would come in useful as you'll see, I chose a trail about a 45-minute drive away from where I lived. I arrived early at the trailhead. The air was crisp and fresh. Renewing even, I went inside the small ranger station to sign in. Greeting me were two men, an older one with bushy gray eyebrows and gray hair and a ponytail, a younger one, probably closer to my own early 30s age with dark, slick back hair. "Good morning," said Ponytail cheerily. "Lovely morning for a hike." I'd have to take his word for it, since this was my very first time hiking, but I smiled back cheerfully as he handed me a pen to sign the visitor's register. Ponytail explained a couple of rules to me. Stay on the designated path, leave and take nothing. And then he said something that made me pause. Now we've been having a bit of a problem with a vagrant in the park. A woman. She's been hassling a few of the hikers. We don't know Dash. He was cut off from the sound of phone ringing in a room to the back of the reception area. He held up a finger to signal he'd be right back. This entire time, Slick had been sitting behind the counter on a stool, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He hadn't said a word until Ponytail left. "Listen here," he said quietly. "That's no woman in the park. He knows it," he said, pointing at Ponytail on the call in the other room. "And I know it. What I am about to say might make you turn around and head straight for your car. But if it doesn't, and you still want to do the trail, then you've got to be careful." He kept his voice low, seemingly to keep Ponytail from overhearing him. "If you see her or whatever, it'll be in a tree. She's always in the trees. She'll try talking to you. Don't engage. Try not to even look up if you hear a voice coming from the trees. But if you can't help it, whatever you do, don't talk back to it. Just pretend it's not there and walk back to the trailhead and get in your car and drive away. If you see her a second time, then run. If she starts climbing down from the tree, then pray." I stare at Slick in shock, my mouth slightly open, not sure if I should start laughing or screaming. "I'm only telling you this," he continued, "because, no offense, I can see you're probably not the most experienced hiker." He looked me up and down, clocking my obvious never-used boots and Pax waist belt harness too tightly around my middle. "And she seems to target people like you. The thing is, it looks like she's not just observing anymore. But Dash," he stopped abruptly as Ponytail came back into the room. Slick stared at me, his expression serious. "Right," said Ponytail. "Sorry about that. Now you have enough water? The round trip takes about 4 hours complete, maybe 5 if you're not walking too fast, or not used to the trail." I nodded, my head still spinning. Now, of course, this is the part one should have turned around and headed straight for my car. But the problem is, I'm terribly stubborn. With Ponytail's implied and Slick's outright judgment of my experience as a hiker, I was very determined to prove them wrong. In fact, 10 minutes into the hike, I had convinced myself that Slick was just trying to scare me off because he probably thought my inexperience would become a problem for him, like I'd be dumb enough to go off trail or try a mountain lion. 30 minutes in, I noticed my boots began to hurt my feet a little. An hour in, the air had turned from crisp and refreshing to thick and oppressive, and the big toe on my left foot was absolutely throbbing. I didn't know how much determination I had left to keep me going forward. I found a bench a couple of minutes later and sat down. I immediately took off my boot and sock and examined the large, raw blister forming on my toe. I hadn't brought a first aid kit and was cursing myself as I took a large gulp of water from my bottle. All of a sudden, I can't describe this any other way, I felt the presence of another person and instinctively looked at the trail. Sure, I'd see another hiker making their way around the bend, but there was no one. I held my breath, waiting. The forest was unnaturally still and quiet, as if it were holding its breath and waiting with me. And then I jumped violently as a group of blackbirds exploded out of a tree a ways down from where I had just come from, cawing angrily as they flew away. Maybe it was the pain or the discomfort from the heat, Or maybe I had started feeling spooked by what Slick had said, but I decided to get out of there, pulling my sock and boot on and packing away my water bottle in record speed. It would take me another hour to get back to my car, maybe a little longer as I had started limping a bit to keep the weight off my left foot. I still had the gnawing feeling that I wasn't alone, that any minute another hiker would appear on the path. Instead, I heard a soft hello from above. I did look. Of course I did. Anyone would. What I saw was an extremely thin, pale woman, sitting on a low branch in a tree above me. Her arms were hugging the trunk, and it took me a moment to realize they must have been impossibly long, because they wrapped around the thick trunk almost entirely. My hands wouldn't have even met each other if I were to do it. Her fingers were long and splayed against the bark, ending in long, dirty nails. Her face would be burned into my memory forever. Her skin was so pale, almost completely white, and her eyes were a light milky blue, too big and too wide apart. She had long, stringy blonde, almost white hair. She was completely naked. "Are you in pain?" she asked in a cracked, wispy voice, and then she started smiling. I expected to see fangs in her mouth. Instead, she had the tiniest teeth spaced apart in swollen pink gums, but they were sharp and pointy, like a crocodile. As her smile got wider and wider at my shock, I felt adrenaline fill my body. Slick's words echoed through my mind. Head back to the trailhead and get to my car. My heart pounding. My neck slick with sweat. I started walking briskly, unsure if turning my back towards her was a terrible idea. I felt her eyes on me. I jogged, gritting my teeth through the pain for what could have been 5 minutes or 50. Please God, I thought, don't let me see her again. My mind tried to reconcile with what I had just witnessed, but I pushed the thoughts out of my head. Worrying about that would dull my senses, and I sure needed all my wits about me to make it back to my car. It was impossible, but somehow she made it to the tree ahead of me. I stopped and felt my heart drop as a pale leg appeared from the thick canopy of a tree just 20 feet ahead, and then another leg appeared. She was climbing down. I started running, ducking as I flew past the tree she was coming down from. A long arm swooped down as I passed, but I managed to dodge her grabbing claws. I looked back and saw that she was at the bottom of the tree on all fours. Her propositions were human, but so wrong. She began to scuttle toward me, like a crab, with short, fast steps. She was covering ground at an alarming rate, and I knew there was no way I could outrun her. I made it to a clearing that I remembered was close to the parking lot. If I could just last 5 more minutes, I could maybe get to safety. And then I tripped, pain searing to my already bloody and blistered toes as they collided with a rock. I landed on my hands with a thud and waited for the inevitable. I was so sure it was about to happen that I could almost feel her collide with me. But nothing. Still on my hands and knees, I shakily turned my head. She was still there, on all fours, but stopped. She let out an animal-like shriek, but didn't come any closer. It took me a while to register. She wouldn't come into the clearing. She was staying in the shade of the trees, prowling, looking for a way to get to me. The sunlight seemed to be what saved me. A million thoughts played out in my mind. I could stay in the clearing until someone else came along. But what if they couldn't help me? What if no one came at all? It would eventually get dark. I knew that after the clearing, for about 300 yards, the path was shaded by trees again before the trailhead. Could I make it if I sprinted? With stomach-churning dread, I knew I would have to try. I kept my eyes on her and started backing up, slowing. She stayed at the shade's edge, watching me, evaluating what I was doing. 200 feet until the path became shaded again. 100, 50, 10, and then I turned around and started sprinting. The trail crested, and I could see the parking lot. I didn't feel relieved. I wasn't safe yet, but I could see safety, and so I allowed myself to hope. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of white. I turned and saw her bounding toward me through the trees. She had come around and was looping towards me. At the speed she was going, I was sure she'd get to me before I made it off the path. Somehow, I managed to push myself, and I heard her shriek again, a sound of pure animalistic frustration and hunger, as I made it back into the sunlight of the parking lot. I flew past the ranger station and fumbled with my keys. My hand was shaking so badly, I nearly dropped them. I managed to unlock my car and get in, locking it again. I started the engine and put it into reverse, swinging out of my parking bay without even looking. Slick came running out of the station, a look of shock and suspicion on his face. I rolled down my window a fraction and yelled at him to go back inside and lock the doors. He hesitated for only a second and then hurried back inside, closing the door behind him. I didn't stop trembling for the entire 45 minutes it took me to get home. I don't know what she was. I don't know what she wanted or what she was going to do to me if she had caught me. What I do know, though, is that after that one and only hike, I've never felt safe again, and I have never shaken off the feeling of being watched. I keep my lights on at home, all the time. I avoid the shade, my shadow now a thing of safety and comfort.